I'd like to call this meeting of the West South Pamunkey School Board to order. Mr. Ustruck, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Burns,
Here.
Mr. Ustruck,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Ms. Deal, Ms. Deal is here remotely, Mrs. Carr,
Here.
Mr. Sikich,
Present.
Mrs. Justum, here, President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Dr. Lexman, are there any modifications to the agenda this evening?
We have no changes.
All right, with that, I'll move on to public comments. As a reminder, for public comments, you have 3 minutes exactly for which to speak. We have a lot of people here this evening and others via Zoom that would like to speak, so we'll be adhering very strictly to the 3-minute time limit, so please make sure your comments are not longer than that. You also need to make sure to state your name and your address before speaking. With that, call the first person up, Mr. John Mulling.
Well, I know you hold us to the 3 minute. I'm John Mulling, 3850 South Pole Drive in New Berlin. Before I start though, I got a request here, a written request for the number, where those 80 books from Ibram Kendi are going to. The book is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. I asked that almost a month ago. Within 2 weeks, you're supposed to have an answer. If I don't have an answer to this by Friday, I'm going to call Joe Sanfilippo, my representative in Madison, who I know very well. I will contact all the major TV stations and hopefully have them come next time or call you before the next meeting and see why you're not answering my question. But the longer this goes that I don't get an answer about Ibram Kendi's stuff, the more I'm thinking you're teaching this stuff. You're teaching this stuff, and I can smell it. Okay, so I'm giving you this again to whoever wants it. I want this by Friday, or I'm calling Joe Sanfilippo. I've had that in for 3 weeks. And I'm not kidding. Okay, 3 minutes. I want to address, I did a lot of research in the last 2 weeks talking about following the science. I want to talk to any board member who wants to follow the science, and Mr. May, who was here at the last, or online on the last meeting. You want to follow the science. Well, I'm going to give you a reason to follow the science, and I want you to follow the science. Here's some quotes from the CDC and WHO. These are all quotes. 1, masks don't work in the community. 2, everyone should wear a mask in the community. 3, everyone should wear 2 masks. 4, every person vaccinated, you should still wear a mask. 5, if you're vaccinated, you can do without a mask. Then there's from St. Fauci. He sent an email to the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Sylvia Burrell. This is a quote from Dr. Fauci. The typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, which is small enough to pass through the material, end of quote. That was from St. Fauci. 2 things block this virus, an N95 mask or a respirator. N95 will block 95% of the particulates. A bacteria like Staph aureus or E. coli is 32 times larger than the COVID virus. 32 times larger. That's why the mask you're wearing work in a hospital if you're changing a wound or something. A prominent UK MD compared using a cloth mask to the equivalent of trying to keep dust out of a horse corral using chicken wire. This is the comparison he's making. This is your mask that you're wearing right now. Dust is the virus. That's the difference in the size of the virus. I don't think that keeps dust out of a corral. Dr. Ben Carson, a renowned pediatric cardiologist surgeon, stated that if you have had COVID or you are fully vaccinated, you do not need to wear a mask. After this meeting, I'd like you to go home, put your mask on, take a cutting board with a big wide blade, take a...
Mr. Mulling, you have 10 seconds to
Okay,
finish your
a
comment.
piece of garlic, smash it. You will smell garlic. That means you just inhaled COVID. last but not least, there's a saying out there we've all heard, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I'll even let you have a piece of the chicken wire so you can look at how dust can get through there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next we have, is it Kevia McCrae?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lakeitha McCrae. I am a proud parent of a senior that attends West Dallas Central. I would just like to say that,
Oh, Ms. McCrae, I'm sorry, can you give us your address, please?
oh, sure, I'm sorry about that. 2445 North 44th Street. I would just like to say that this is really a joke. It is a joke from one end of the spectrum to another. I don't understand why something so easy as covering your mouth so that you don't infect others and get infected is such a problem. I am a parent that I am an individual that has lost more than 5 freaking family members to COVID. And if you have not lost anybody in your family, and I'm talking about direct contact with people. I lost my grandmother, April Fool's Day. We were not even able to all go to her funeral. We were not even able to plan her funeral because we all had to quarantine. This is very serious. And if you haven't lost anybody, you can't sit here and tell somebody how serious or how big of a joke it is. It's not. My daughter worked her butt off to be, she has a 3.7 GPA. She worked her tail off her whole 4 years of school. AP classes, honor classes, all of her teachers and counselors vouch for her, write letters for her. My daughter has a right to walk across that stage in a healthy environment. School is supposed to be a healthy place for our children. Because if we send our kids to school and they haven't eaten, if we send our kids to school and they have reps on them, that's a big problem. Well, guess what? I have a big problem if I send my child to school and she comes home and she gets us sick. Or she comes home and she's sick. Something as simple as covering your mouth. I don't understand it. And we all know that these children are children. So when they go back to school and they're unmasked, guess what? They're going to be playing jokes with this, coughing and sneezing around folks and thinking it's funny. Well, guess what? My daughter's going to be uncomfortable, just like every other child in that school is going to be uncomfortable. Guess what? Then now she's at school, she can't even learn. Somewhere where I send her to school to learn. Somewhere where I pay to make sure that she gets the proper education. If we're going to be safe, let's be safe all around. I don't care what Dr. Fauci and everybody else in the CDC and that damn chicken wire that he set up there. This is saving people's lives. It's stopping it from spreading. If the numbers were going down with us covering, why can't we keep that same energy until we get it under control? After the Deer District thing, the numbers shot up. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to bury my daughter. I don't want to bury her father. I don't want to bury my mother. It's serious. It is serious to the African American community. It is damn serious. And if you don't care about others, care about somebody besides yourself.
Ms.
What
McCrae.
happened and where we don't care about each other anymore?
Ms. McCrae, 10 seconds, please.
We don't care about each other anymore. What's going to happen is we're going to mess around and we're going to kill all our goddamn asses here. That's what's going to happen. It's about the children and about being safe.
Thank you, Ms. McCrae.
Can I just say something?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Malling.
He timed me for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Malling, please.
And my last line was, if you're going to wear a mask, wear an N95 mask that does good. And
I don't have a problem wearing one.
All right.
And you got money from the federal government, so buy everybody an N95, which works.
I'm down with that too.
Good.
I'm down with that too.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. You both had your time to speak.
Get an N95 mask and everybody will be fine.
Is it Kai and Rael Martin?
T-Rail.
I'm sorry, Kirel Martin.
Hello, my name is, can you hear me? Okay. Hello, my name is Kimberly Martin, and my residence is 2445 North 44th Street. I would like to start off to say, I know that my mother was very emotional, and I would like to just come up here and say my piece. But I like to start off with saying this is emotional, so whoever told my mother, all right, can please not. That's it, on that part. And I'm a senior this year, so let's get into not just that, because that was disrespectful and rude. But I'm a senior this year, and like my mom said, I worked really hard. I understand that some people don't want to wear it. I understand it's uncomfortable. I understand that it's not what we were accustomed to. But if it's able to save lives or allow me to go to school and be safe, that's what I want to do. And I didn't prepare a whole paper or do all this research, and maybe that was ignorant of me, but it make you not listen to me as much as anybody else who gets on here who has research or has a whole paper out. But I don't have much to say besides I just want to go to school and feel safe, and I want to be able to enjoy my senior year that I worked hard for, and I want to be able to walk across the stage and not have to do a drive-by graduation, and I want to be able to go to prom and see my friends that I haven't been able to see in a year and a half, and I just want everyone to be safe. Because like my mom said, I lost my great-grandmother to this and other family members that I didn't even get to see be buried. And I'm usually not emotional about COVID. I understand everybody has their own opinions, and I don't like to be disrespectful to other people's opinions. But this is not an opinion. I do believe that people's safety and health and people's rights and safety and health are not opinions, just like how I feel like people's mental health is not an opinion, people's safety, whether it is physically, emotionally, is not an opinion. Civil rights is not an opinion. So to lump that all together, I don't think wearing masks during school for 7-8 hours shouldn't be an opinion. I think it should just be what it should be. And like he said, whatever mask is most effective, I really don't care. I'll wear it, and I think that everybody else should wear it. He's right. Some masks aren't effective, and you still can die whether you wear a mask or not, and you can still die if you get the vaccine. You can still die with anything you do in this world. But if there's a mask, no matter if it makes me look stupid or it's uncomfortable for a little bit, I'll wear it if I can be safe and keep others safe and know that nobody's blood is on my hands from not being responsible. And I don't know if I didn't meet my 3-minute mark, but that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin.
Thank you. Oh, and also, people are going to have different opinions. Don't be disrespectful, because then no one wants to hear you.
All right, Leah Zaharias.
Leah Zaharias, 1958 South 93rd Street. I want to start off by making it clear why I'm fighting this fight to make masks optional in our school district. We've had such a great experience at Irving Elementary School, and we want our kids to continue their education there. We've looked at different options such as private school, homeschooling, and open enrollment, but our family would be heartbroken to leave Irving. I've spoken here a handful of times and sent numerous emails to the board. My main questions and requests still continue to be unanswered. Where is the science? The 9 of you are making a decision that impacts the health and well-being of not only my children, but over 8,000 children. The burden of scientific proof falls on the 9 of you. Before making your decision, provide evidence that masks are significantly effective against a respiratory virus, and that making a child wear a mask for 7 to 8 hours a day won't cause harm. Because in the research that I have done, it's proven that these studies do not exist. But I've requested the scientific proof from you multiple times and received nothing except links to the CDC websites and links to opinion articles. Linking the CDC is not following and reading the actual science, it's blind faith. I know there's no science I can send you to convince you that masks are useless and have the potential to cause harm. I know this because I've sent countless scientific peer-reviewed articles. I've done countless hours of research and reading. Have you guys? And if you have, please provide us with the science that proves masks stop respiratory viruses and cause no harm to our children wearing them for 7 to 8 hours a day. The responsibility is yours. for the 8,000 students that you are here to advocate for. In the past year and a half since the pandemic began, there have been fewer than 300 COVID-related deaths among those 17 and under. With a total of 56 million children in the U.S., that amounts to one death for every 200,000 children. By way of comparison, in the past 8 years, the flu has killed an average of 456 children a year. COVID has been a mild flu season for children. The American Academy of Pediatrics reports that about 4.13 million children have tested positive for COVID-19 since the onset of the pandemic. That's a death rate of 0.007% of the tested. That's not even taking into account all the kids who never had symptoms or were never tested. COVID cases and hospitalizations are rare among children. Children account for 14% of all COVID cases in the US and 1.3 to 3.6% of all hospitalizations. Fewer than 2% and possibly as few as 0.1% of children who contracted COVID had to be hospitalized. Children are not contracting, getting severely ill, or dying from COVID. And fortunately for our teachers, support staff, the science has proven that children are not spreaders of COVID-19. In addition, staff and older family members have all been offered the vaccine. I've sent you the science. Masking is unsafe, and the reasons for mask wearing are unscientific. Please follow the science and data and make masks optional this school year.
Thank you. Jennifer Graf.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Graf, 2577 South 99th Street in West Dallas. I'm here tonight to ask you to make masks optional, not only for all the smart reasons that Dr. Michael Johnson has stated in his recommendation email, but because ultimately these are our children that we, the parents, are responsible for. We are their protectors, not the school board or the district. We should be able to decide for them. They too are Americans with rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve Broadwell.
Steve Broadwell, 12965 West Ohio Court in New Berlin. It's clear you've implemented CRT concepts here. Proof consists of your equity mission is highlighted on your website. The workshop materials you have your educators study and the racial justice activism you encourage on the part of students. Your equity mission involves those leaders regarding several books by Marxists like Ibram Kendi, who sees racism in absolutely everything and states that the only way to be an anti-racist is to be an anti-capitalist. Another was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, who states that all white people are racist and labels white ideas like meritocracy and individualism as white supremacy. Another book titled So You Want to Talk About Race contends that America is systematically racist and argues that whites have structured the United States to serve their sense of entitled superiority at the expense of everybody else. And finally, a fourth that they read was Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, in which the author states that racism is systematic oppression based on race. Why indoctrinate our children's educators with this, I'm calling it poison, tasking them with reading books by writers who obviously don't like this country, as they intentionally or unintentionally make race relations worse? Your April 20th letter, Mr. Lexman, that spawned this district's hyper-focus on race and equity said the George Floyd death compelled you to act. Do you know that in 2019 there were 9 unarmed black men killed by police? In that same time, 27 unarmed white men were killed by police. Why would such a relatively isolated incident, though terrible, compel you to implement CRT concepts? Anyone would agree it's important to teach our children about our past transgressions, like slavery, and yes, there are certainly still racist individuals in our country today, but why dwell on it? Rather, wouldn't it be more productive and positive to focus on the greatness of this country and that we're all Americans? Another disturbing trend gleaned from various documents is your desire to create student activists. Project 61 was presented as part of this year's State of the School presentation, noting one student's project in which she highlighted her activism over the summer. Another example of this social justice standards document you sent to me, Mr. Letzman, that states, and I quote, "Students will plan and carry out collective action against bias and injustice in the world and will evaluate what strategies are most effective," end quote. Sounds like a BLM job description. Your job is not to create activists. And I would say, parents, if you see a change in your child's attitude about this stuff and perhaps even bordering on militancy like BLM and Antifa, you will know where it came from. I do believe some of you might feel that you're doing a good thing. I really do. And that's understandable considering you were indoctrinated in college by Marxist professors who have taken over many of our universities. As mentioned before, our education system is the biggest reason a majority of our young now favor communism, the practical application of the Marxist philosophy, which is a totalitarian system that's killed over 100 million of its own people over our capitalist system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broadwell. Sorry. Rhonda Jones.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Jones. My address is 1457 South 86th Street. I came here, like some others, to oppose the mask mandate, but to make it not mandatory, but by choice. I understand that this board and this superintendent possibly have no interest in changing their minds and would rather plow forward with masking up our children, even against the advice of the medical director, Dr. Michael Johnson of the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District, who stated in his email recently, I am against masks for children as we have ample data from schools all over the world that children do not spread COVID, as contact tracing in schools indicates that the adults give it to each other and much less frequently to children. Child to adult transmission in schools proved to be an unusual event. Children express little of the ACE2 receptor that COVID binds to, which is why they do not get very ill and have lower viral loads, which results in less transmission of the virus to others. There are also multiple studies describing the negative physical and psychological effects of masking children for an entire school day. He goes on to say that paper and cloth masks are not designed to stop something as small as a COVID variant. Only a properly fitted N95 mask will stop a COVID variant from passing through. As a mom, I will attest to the fact that my 15-year-old son has been affected strongly by this. My once very happy, funny, bright boy who did well in school now struggles immensely because of many of the constraints that have been put in place. He now takes antidepressants. He's had occasional thoughts of suicide, and he's withdrawn. He doesn't want to get up in the morning. This is not who my son was before all of the isolation. I've done many things to try and help him, and I fear that he will only sink deeper as his self-esteem dips lower. Instead of jumping on board and demanding that our kids be muzzled yet for another year, I would love for this board to stand up and do something wonderful for the emotional health of our children. Even a compromise would be wonderful. If parents feel the need to have their children wear masks, let them. If other parents feel it is not best for their kids, let them make that decision for their children. If you need a trial run to see how things go, give them a quarter or give them even a semester to see how things go. If rates at our schools rise, then it's time to reevaluate. But it is time for you to stop silencing the parents who do care about our children, and it's time that you open your ears and listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Katzmeier.
Hello, good evening. Jessica Katzmeier, 7139 West Greenfield Avenue. And I will be brief, and I hear a lot of different opposing views and views here for the mask mandates, and I'm here for the mask mandate today because I believe that we have to think about everybody that is involved here, that we gotta stop thinking about ourselves and this situation and think about who all is infected. We gotta think about the teachers, we gotta think about the staff in these schools, and all the children. So that's why I am in favor of this mask mandate. And you know, this virus is just getting worse again. And I think if we just had this in place, hopefully we can get back to our normal life, because I would like to stop wearing these things too. So And that's basically all I have to say, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Dennis Weisselmann?
I'm Dennis Weisselmann, 723 South 90th Street. I didn't come with a bunch of prepared statements and stuff like that, but I am one that I like to look at the science and stuff like that. I know in my life, all the things that I've been around, all the diseases that I've had, all the viruses, and I just fought through them all, and not everybody can. I'm probably in a high-risk group. I've never worn a mask unless it was mandated that I did so. I've got grandchildren that I see weekly and slobber over, and they slobber over me from preschool and in grade school. And, you know, I've gotten every virus that they could bring home. And the best thing in my assessment for this is to fight it is fresh air, which you don't get when you're wearing a mask. If you're wearing a mask, you're breathing your own carbon dioxide, which should be giving you a headache. I know it did for my daughter because she is a nurse and was mandated to wear a mask through her shifts and that, and for a long time she was getting headaches from it. I listened to people. I've heard emotional responses for the mask, saying that it kills people with no factual backup to it. I also have heard a lot of substantive, objective information regarding not wearing masks and the damage it does. The damage that it does. As far as losing somebody to COVID, yeah, I know, I've met people that did end up losing their lives as they would with the flu or some other virus. But I also know that my parents lost their lives to the lockdowns. And we weren't able to have a decent funeral for them. So from the emotional side of that, I can match you. But it's, if you think masks are gonna do you good, then wear a mask. But don't mandate it, please, for those that think otherwise.
All right, thank you. Eric North?
Hello, Eric North, 2001 South 71st Street in West Dallas. I'm here tonight to urge the school board and Dr. Lexman to consider following the example of our surrounding districts and making masks optional for the 2021-2022 school year. This is truly a solution that can work for everyone, as the majority of parents in this district have expressed that the health and development concerns of masking their child far outweighs the risk of them being exposed to COVID. If the board had bothered to send a survey on this matter, you might know this. For the small group of parents who do wish to mask their child, they're free to do that. Or they can enroll their child in a virtual academy. Should be plenty of seats open. We need to remember that children are not the bearers of this burden, it's the adults. So when you talk about following the science, follow it. Look at the statistics of child transmission even during the height of the pandemic. They barely made the charts. So the question goes to, what about the teachers? Do we mask them and not the children? Well, no. You can't do that because masking the teachers covers their mouths and their faces, both of which a developing child needs to clearly see in order to understand things like speech and pronunciation, and just to be able to connect with and be comfortable with a friendly, familiar face. A solution I can offer to this: to the best of my knowledge, there are never more than 2 teachers in a classroom at any given time. So social distancing and other mitigation measures between these 2 adults should be relatively easy to accomplish without burdening anyone in that classroom with wearing a mask. One individual came up here not too long ago, and I won't name names, but some of you may remember him. He came up here calling the parents of this district whiners, and he contended that our kids don't seem to mind the masks. Whether or not our kids mind the masks is not the issue. The issue is that we have a responsibility for looking after what's best for our children's health and development, and putting them in a mask for 7 hours a day in a stuffy classroom is not. Please follow the majority voice of your electors and make masks optional this coming school year. Thank you.
Thank you. Chanel Carlstrand?
Chanel Carlstrand, 2001 South 71st Street in West Allis. I'm here today to urge the board to vote to make masks optional for the 2021-2022 school year. I could stand here today and go over all the facts and issues that many parents in this district have stated over why our children should not be wearing masks in classrooms. However, it appears to me that most of their concerns seem to keep falling on deaf ears. So instead, I'd like to take this time today to shame you. I would first like to shame you for keeping our children in virtual school for so long, using unreasonable metrics to move through the phases. It was 5 months before any child stepped foot in a classroom. Shame on you for falsely claiming that your intent was to get all children back into school, but once it was decided to go into the next phase, you'd wait a month before implementing that change, claiming that preparations still needed to be done. Preparation should have already been done. After all, these milestones and returning the children back into school was your intent, you said. Shame on you for being so focused on COVID that you lost sight of all the consequences that your decisions would have on the children of this district and their families. And shame on you for only following one science and blinding your eyes to all other professional opinions and studies. Shame on you for dismissing the people that elected you, the parents who have valid concerns and complaints. Instead of addressing issues you have hid behind COVID, the CDC, the local health department as an excuse for why you couldn't and wouldn't do anything to help. The decisions that you have made over the last year have caused families more stress and frustration than actual virus itself. You were elected by us to vote for what is best for our children and to listen to the majority voices. I believe you failed us. Because of your choices, my children have suffered academically, socially, and emotionally. I know you will justify your actions by saying COVID is dangerous and that you were just trying to protect all children. Well, truthfully, you did not protect mine from the ramifications of all the choices that you have made since this pandemic has begun. And because of that, I no longer trust any decision that any decisions you make that are in the best interest of my children. I think it's time for you to start actually listening to the parents of the district, and I think it's time for you to start doing a better job representing the people that elected you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to leave, but I want to point out that Mr. Lexman has been typing.
Mr. Malling, your time to speak is over.
Computer the whole time and never heard a word she said. Next time, listen, Mr. Lexman.
Jason Darling?
Good evening, Jason Darling, 1037 West McGonigal Drive. Back again, same thing, shadowing what many are here speaking out about. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's 38 groups within the state of Wisconsin, many of them that are local. It's part of the McIver Institute. You can find them at McIverinstitute.com. There's 38 groups that have all organized. It consists of 20,000 families, and that number is steadily growing now. This has been 2 weeks ago this report came out. They've all stepped up to strictly fight back about the masks and proposed lockdowns. They've come at attack on the school boards for the upcoming school year to at least ask for the optional mandate. I'll quote them real quick. It's kind of quoted before. but they're not your children, they're ours, and they too are Americans with rights. There's been constant changes from the CDC. Another gentleman had mentioned some of those. They're constantly throwing out a Hail Mary every time. People have since gotten wise, though, to the game, and I'm wondering, when will you? If mask works, then optional seems like a win for all that are involved. I said this to you guys over a Zoom meeting months and months ago. This isn't going to go away. We have to learn how to live with it. You're trying to do something that has already been done, tried, and can't do it, and it can't be done with the virus. This was also just shadowed by Dr. Dan Stock, which is now, as of today, a viral video if you guys would like to watch that. Dr. Dan Stock is from Indiana. Also on a school board meeting, he had blasted them about the same issue with all the facts about how everything, kids just don't carry it. Pretty much copying our Dr. Johnson. And if we have a medical examiner or doctor advisor that is telling you guys that his recommendation is to advise against the masks on our youth for psychological, physical harm, I'm wondering why there's any question on it. We paid this person to give you guys the recommendations, to give you guys the suggestions, but rumor has it is that you guys are still going to force the masks upon us. Earlier today, actually, though, too, Belling blasted you guys, bringing up Dr. Johnson's email, your previous mitigations, previous decisions, and this is going back further than COVID and the shutdowns. I would be embarrassed if I were you guys and if I was on this board. You guys have a moral responsibility to do the right thing to our children, to our district, to the parents, to the citizens. You need to start doing what you know is right, not what you're being told to do. I can also tell you too that you've lost families over your decisions in the past year. And within the last week now, I can confirm 2 teachers that I know that have just recently taken jobs in neighboring districts because they don't want to deal with it. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Michael Jakes?
I'm Michael Jocks, 2206 South 74th. I'm here to oppose the mask mandate as to back up the parents and the kids. I used to work in the medical profession. I know a little bit about this, but I have here in my hand, which I want to give to somebody here on the board who can distribute it to everybody. I have 1 copy. 47 studies here from the National Institute of Health and CDC all say that masks do not stop the virus from going through. And 32 studies in here showing the harm that masks cause, including the disease that it causes, because these masks get filthy dirty. And it's been proven when they do cultures of these masks, they got everything growing underneath in these masks underneath the sun. And some kids have gotten brain infections from them in this country. As far as masks not working in relationship to these studies are all coming from the CDC and National Institute of Health. There are other studies out there from respected medical journals, and all these studies are prior to COVID. And so they always show that respiratory disease, respiratory viruses can't be stopped by masks. Why is that true? If you can breathe, that virus goes in and out the same way your oxygen and CO2 is going in and out. And so that surgical mask that you're wearing up there goes into the sides and up to the top. And a cloth mask that goes right straight through. And an N95, it seals off the air more, and because it seals off the air more, it'll slow the virus from going through, but even that is not efficient enough to stop it. But by sealing off the air more, you don't get enough oxygen and CO2, you can't wear that for a very long time without getting headaches and your CO2 going up and ending up with potential toxicity in relationship to CO2. In relationship to the N95, when I used to work in the hospital, we used to have to draw blood. And when it went into a highly infectious respiratory patient, we wore the N95 mask, but that wasn't insufficient in and of itself to stop the spread of the disease. And so they had those patients in what they call a negative pressure room where the air is constantly being sucked out. So it made a much lower viral load for you to be able to get infected and made it safe that way. This past year when they had the masks, I would try to avoid wearing them wherever I could. And when I walk into the grocery store, I tell them I got COPD. That gives me a medical exemption. But this particular thing here has a picture showing how the virus would leak out the sides with your breathing, with the vapor going out the sides of the mask. These masks are used for a painter, asbestos person, and a coal miner, and they're all completely engulfed, all completely over the whole entire head. Versus this little mask, this cloth mask that Fauci's wearing, is going to supposedly protect us the most deadly virus in the world. Give me a break. It ain't happening. And everybody who got this virus, since most people were wearing the mask versus me, most everybody got the virus while wearing a mask. So it tells you it doesn't. These masks are inefficient, and they can never stop it. And that's the reason why they've never been used to stop a viral disease in the past before for anything that's been highly infectious in the common community.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jakes. Jocks? All right, at this time, I would like to open it up for those who are in Zoom. If you are interested in providing a public comment to the board at this time, please put your name into Zoom chat. I have a couple people here already, but if there's other people listening who have not done so already, please put your name in so that I can give you an opportunity. All right, so the first one I have is, I believe, Tiffany Arnold. She put her name first and then again second, so I'm going to go with Tiffany Arnold.
Mr. President,
Yes.
looks like somebody's was signed up and didn't get called.
Is there another sign up? Because this is what I have in front of me. Is there another sign up sheet? No?
I wrote my name down.
Okay. What's your name? Linda. Right. So we'll do Linda Vick, and then we'll move on to public comments. Linda Vick?
My name is Linda Vick. I live at 2184 South 77th Street, West Dallas. I'm begging you to make masks optional. With many other people here, I can see that this seems to be the majority. Anyway, if vaccines, which have been pushed so hard, are supposed to protect us from COVID-19, then if you get the vaccine, I would think you'd be able to make the choice to whether or not you want to wear a mask or not. If you are protected, that's your business, and it is your right to wear a mask. But I want my kids to be able to go to school and not wear a mask. If they're vaccinated, they shouldn't have to worry about it. They're not going to pass it to anybody else. And if we're going to make them wear masks, then you have to realize that they're not doing it right in the schools. According to the CDC, the guideline for wearing masks in school is not being followed. They are to wash their hands before they take the mask out of the plastic wrapper. Then they put it on. They wear it until they take a break, which is maybe 2.5 hours. Before they take it off, they are supposed to wash their hands, not use sanitizer. There is no lines where these kids are going into the bathrooms and washing their hands for 20 seconds and then putting their mask in another bag and sealing it up during their break. They're wearing them on their wrists, they're wearing them under their chin. That's what they do when they go to lunch. If we're gonna make teachers be police on how these kids wear the masks, then they're not gonna have time to teach. So if they're not gonna wear them properly, they don't really provide any protection. But I do believe that if that makes you feel better, having your kid go to school wearing a mask, that's fine. But I just don't want anybody telling me that I can't make that decision for my children on my own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who signed up that did not get an opportunity to speak that would like to? If not, we will then move on to those who are in Zoom, and we'll start with Tiffany Arnold.
Hello, my name is Tiffany Arnold. I live at 2100 South 95th Street. I have 2 children that go to Irving Elementary. I'm thankful that you're letting us share our opinions. I'm a little bit concerned that everyone's mind is already made up, so I'm not sure exactly how this is going to affect anyone. So my heart is just a little bit heavy on this topic. because I feel like some of our freedoms are taken away, and I would really love the option to have the choice. I understand, like, we all have beliefs, which create our emotions and then our behaviors. And I want everyone to be able to have their freedoms, but I believe for the mask, I would love for it to be freedom of choice for the parents to decide what's appropriate for their children. And I wanted to share, I'm just opening up. I had a song that came to mind because that's how things speak to me, is a lot of times through music. You can all search it on your own and I can leave it in the comments. But the song is called Freedom from Jesus Culture. And it just talks about where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And I believe that if we can all just come together and kind of love one another and just consider one another, I think we can work it out just fine. And we can all live in peace, and just all the people that are getting vaccinations, they're creating more safety for themselves to not get affected. Taking care of ourselves nutritionally, I think, is really important. I think our real battle here isn't necessarily against like us people in our community, but it's against like the rulers and authorities and the powers of this world that are bigger than us. And there are other things that are going on that are unseen to the human eye. And I just pray a blessing over all of you that are making this decision. I just pray that God would lay on your heart the best thing to do, the safest thing to do for all of us. And I'm just really trusting more in Jesus to help, and that the Holy Spirit would lead all of you and bless you and keep you. Amen. That's all.
All right, thank you. Next on the list, we have Janine Begley.
I'm Janine Begley, 2826 South 83rd Street. I have a 4Ker and twins in second grade. We attend General Mitchell. And I'm asking you as a board to make the decision of wearing masks, at least at the elementary level, optional. I could list all the reasons why, most especially the fact that little kids are not super spreaders, but I would just really be repeating everything that everybody has already said before, and I'm not sure that that's working. So I'd like to try a different route. Little kids are disgusting. They are gross. I cannot tell you how gross they are. Perhaps you guys have forgotten. A little kid, and a little kid is second grade still, they chew on their masks. So you have a mask full of spit. They snot on their masks, a mask full of snot. They drop their masks on the ground, which, can be as clean as possible. It's not gonna be the best thing in the world. They have their spitty, snotty, wet mask on the ground. They pick it up and they put it back on. That's not to say, what about all of the kids that never change their masks? Now, I'm one of those parents that will try my hardest to every day give them a new mask, but there's a lot of people that don't. So you're wearing days old worth of spit, snot, dirt, just disgusting. I think you guys kind of forget about that. We're also going to be starting school, when it's warm. So what about the sweat and all of that? Now, my second grader would constantly get in trouble last year in first grade because he would pull his mask down to talk. He would pull his mask down because he had a hard time breathing. How can you punish a kid that's trying to breathe properly because they're not wearing a mask? He would get in trouble all of the time. I'd constantly have teachers or action coming to me and saying, my son got in trouble because he wasn't wearing a mask. As a parent, my heart's breaking for them. They have to enforce this rule, but also for my child who's really not doing anything that's super wrong that he should get punished for, but then I have to come up with some sort of punishment or bribe to get him to wear a mask. It's really ridiculous. Please let me decide what's best for my kids. Did we forget that whole my body, my decision? These are my kids. They don't get the choice yet. I get to choose for them. They shouldn't be forced to wear a mask. Now, if people are afraid and they want to wear a mask, let them, by all means, let them. I'm not saying don't wear masks. I'm saying I don't want my kids to wear a mask. I don't want all that dirty, gross germs, and I don't want them to get in trouble. It is ridiculous. Please have an open mind when you vote, and please make masks optional. It's the best of both worlds. You really can't go wrong if you make it optional. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next on the list, Michael May.
Board members, my name is Michael May, 837 South 113. Thanks for hosting this meeting tonight. We all have varied careers and areas of expertise. I don't trust an HVAC technician to provide a medical physical any more than a doctor to work on my car. I think we should trust the overwhelming consensus of epidemiologists, virologists, and medical professionals to best determine our course of action. And the organizations currently recommending indoor masking in K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status, include the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, Wisconsin Department of Health Services, UW Health, Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, health commissioners from all 10 health departments in Milwaukee County, including West Allis's own health commissioner. And I know Dr. Johnson does not recommend them, but a number of his colleagues at Ascension do, as they've gone to other boards and recommended that mask be mandatory for K-12 students. Now, I understand that you're in an interesting predicament here. Whichever way you go on this, you're gonna anger some people. So I ask you to consider the policy implications of what you're doing. And here's a few good reasons why you should require masks in school. First, they are shown to be safe and effective measures to help reduce the transmission of virus. Is it 100% foolproof? No, but it helps reduce it. How? It's the first line of defense in arresting the spread of virus from the infected wearer. When a person wears a mask and they breathe out, the air does not spread out in front of them. It may spread down below their mask or above their nose, but it keeps the water droplets close to that person. And then second of all, for the person who wears it, it helps them sort of as a secondary barrier, but nowhere near as effective as having the first line of defense being on the infected person. I'm an engineer. I am not an epidemiologist, virologist, or medical professional, and I believe we have one of those on our school board, but another 8 who are, like me, not in those professions. But in engineering, we have a thing where we say every problem begs for solutions and every solution creates residual problems. So what is the best outcome here in order to help reduce the possibility for the costly and highly disruptive practice of closing classrooms, entire grade levels, or entire school when an outbreak occurs? Wear the masks. Now, I understand there were some people who said, well, the CDC changes their mind so much, and I think that's why I trust them even more. And I'll tell you why, because the science on this changes. The knowledge of the virus and its behavior changes. So does community spread. So do mutations and new variants and their behaviors. We don't live in a static environment, and this is a constantly changing thing. Now, in the last meeting, I do want to offer a quick apology. I don't want to mention names, but I had north of about 2 to 3 people contact me on my comment last meeting where I said the parents were the biggest whiners, and I tried making the comparison that parents seem to be more vocal than kids in being opposed to masks, and I do want to apologize for that phrasing. What I really intended to say is that, kids seem to be much more adaptable to the masks than their parents are. Lastly, there's comments about CO2 poisoning. That's simply not the case. It was brought up that there was a study in the Journal of American Medicine that said it was causing poisoning, but that journal was retracted because it was poorly conducted, and the American Medical Association did not agree with that the study was properly done. So again, if you would please do us the favor, again, trust the experts, put good policy before good politics, and minimize other problems that could come forth, please require masks for indoor activities at school. And continue trusting the science and adapt if things change. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. May. SusanPavlick.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. SusanPavlick, 3404 South 119th Street, West Dallas. I'm here to ask you to make masks optional once again. To go off of what Michael just said about parents being whiners, I raise my kids to be respectful. I don't raise them to, shout their opinion at every turn. So no, my kid is going to, if they have to wear a mask, they will do it politely. And they'll come home to me and vent about how they hate wearing it. So it's not their job to do that to a teacher or an adult, because that's how they are raised. So I would prefer if people would leave that argument out. It's my job as a parent to fight that battle for them. And that's what I'm going to do, because we parents are fed up with things that don't make sense. The school has air purifiers. Most rooms have windows. I know they all don't. Open a window. But you spent how many thousands of dollars on the air purifiers? That alone should be good enough for you. Let's focus on hand washing. Things that matter in stopping the spread of germs. How about let's teach our kids proper hygiene skills, which the parents should already be doing that at home, but maybe we need to do that at school. How about we start having the kids wash their hands before lunch, teaching them how to cough and sneeze into their elbow or down their shirts, anywhere but their hands. And my kids were in rec sports at Hale High School, which I think is hilarious that they came out with a thing saying you don't need to wear a mask between certain hours, but come a certain time, I think it was 5:30, you now had to wear a mask because COVID only exists in the schools between certain hours, apparently. Same thing as how you can play in the playground outside, touching, hugging, laughing in each other's faces outside, but you can't get COVID then. But oh no, if you do that inside the school building, we're spreading COVID. Our own medical director doesn't want to mask kids. Cloth masks don't stop the spread. It's a feel-good thing. But do you know what they are doing? They're affecting our kids emotionally and mentally. Suicide and depression rates have drastically gone up. That is what you should be looking at. If you really care about our kids, look at those statistics and then let's have a conversation. My own kids have said it makes them feel lonely. You can't see someone's face, their expressions, what they're feeling. You can't. I will not send my 4K-er to school. I'm gonna hold him back and just keep him at home, because to me, sending my 4K-er to school with a mask on all day is not beneficial to him. You can't see someone's mouth moving. How are you supposed to learn how to enunciate and, talk and read and do all these things? You need to see someone's face. I guess, are you even listening to us, or are you just daydreaming when we talk to you? Because there's been maybe one person here who's been in favor of masks, and every other parent is begging you to make it optional. So please, I'm also begging you to make it optional. Start listening to us. It's sad that you guys are implementing a strategy to combine two high schools because you have so few kids who are attending your district. Look at that. You're going to have more people leaving your district because you're not listening to us and what we want. We are the parents. We can decide what is best for their health. That's not your job. Your job is to give them a good education, which that is lacking because my own kid, one of my kids, I have 4 kids that attend, well, they would have been 3 kids currently in the district. One of them you guys failed him drastically to the virtual, and the whole masking thing. So I'm
Ms.
begging
Pavlik,
you
if you
to
could
make
please
it
wrap up your
optional.
comments.
I've already looked into homeschooling and private and open enrollment, and I was too late on all those things. So my only option is homeschool, and I don't know if I can make that work. So I am begging you, make masks optional. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right, thank you. I believe the next person's name is Ellen Cross.
Cross. I live at 2162 South 62nd Street, and I'm asking you to please make masks mandatory for this coming school year. I have 2 kids in the district, but honestly, it's not about my kids. It's not about me. It's about all of us. It's about our whole community, our whole country. And what I wanted to say, Mr. May actually said so much more eloquently, but basically, people can read the research, they can cite all the studies that they've read, you can find things to support your feelings either way. But the only thing that is for certain is that we don't know what's happening with this virus. It's mutating, it's catching us off guard. And wearing a mask is such a simple thing that you can do to keep yourself and others safe. And I had a hard time sending my kids to school in masks last year. My employer just mandated masks again after giving us a reprieve, and honestly, it weighed on me. But death and sickness and lockdowns is so much worse than wearing a mask. And I think for our kids, the way that we present our feelings about masks, the way that we model masks to them makes all the difference. And if we promote it as an altruistic thing that we can do to keep ourselves and others safe, kids are naturally, like, they want to help, they want to do good. And so I think a lot of the negativity that comes from kids wearing masks comes down from adults and what they hear. And so all that said, I appreciate the dialogue, I appreciate the discussion, and again, I am just asking you to require masks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Gina Mazzoni. Gina, we can't hear you if you're talking. Oh, she says her mic's not working. Okay. Well, if your mic's not working, then I guess we can't hear from you, but feel free to submit your comments to the board if you would like. And we will move on. If you get it working, please put it in the chat again. I'll keep an eye on it. But we'll move on to the next person who I believe is, sorry, I have to scroll down. Where'd it go? Angela DeQuardo?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm good?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, good evening. My name is Angela DeQuardo, 2744 South 130. We're in New Berlin, but the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District. I'd like to propose a mask optional school year for the 2021 and 2022 school year. As a family, we have 3 young children, and we have chosen to enroll private as of last year, and will continue to do so moving forward after review of the previous school year and how the pandemic was handled. This is not including the end of the 2019 and 2020 year. I realize that that was a very abrupt and difficult situation to navigate in March of 2020. We are grateful as a family that we have the ability to do that, but it is not easy for us. And not every family does have that ability to enroll private, open enroll, or homeschool. I am here today to speak on behalf of my family, but also for those that will not have the ability to open enroll elsewhere. We are the parents, and we should have a say in how we protect our children. Numerous speakers before myself this evening and in meetings past have provided what I believe is ample evidence to speak to this upcoming school year being mask optional. Parents should have the ability to virtual school should they choose as well. That is a technology that already exists in this district, and we should allow them that should they have concerns about others not being masked in the classroom. I'm not sure if a survey has been done on a more broad scale on this topic since our family did choose to enroll elsewhere. But if that does exist or happen, I'd like to politely ask to be included, as we are a resident of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District and our taxes go there. And it may also affect our private school, being that it is also local in the West Allis area. I realize that this is a pretty large school district, but it's been over a year and a half of this. So in closing, I'd just like to urge you to listen to your local West Allis West Milwaukee Medical Director, Dr. Johnson. But I'd also like to urge you to listen to those that have elected you, we, the parents of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I believe that Ms. Mazzoni has gotten her microphone to work, so we'll try one more time for Gina Mazzoni.
My apologies. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Gina Mazzoni. I'm at 1725 South 84th Street in West Allis. And I would like to speak for mandating mask wearing. I have 3 different reasons that I'd like to speak, and I guess I kind of want to go into details on those. The first is that the science behind the mask wearing has shown that the mask wearing does reduce the risk to individuals of spreading the disorder. The next component that I want to look at is that I agree we should all have a say in how we keep our children safe. But the problem is that we have children within this district with asthma, heart problems, diabetes, and those children are at increased risk of severe complications from COVID. I've spoken to several doctors who have had to watch young children die of complications from COVID-19 in a hospital. And I don't want any of us as a parent and as a community to have to go through that. And I'm begging you, as a parent of an asthmatic and as an asthmatic myself, to please consider that in your decision as well. Because even if my child is wearing a mask, they're more protected if everyone else around them is also wearing a mask. I would appreciate if you wouldn't call me any names. Thank you. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is that currently colleges within the area are also remandating the wearing of masks within their facility despite vaccinations because the increase in COVID-19 cases in our area at this time. And I'd like you guys to consider that as well as the information from Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, our local health department, and also the CDC that state that scientifically our kids are safer if masks are worn. And not only our kids, but all of our families and the community as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That's the last person that I had seen put a comment in chat for Zoom asking for an opportunity to address the board. I will give one last opportunity for that. If there's anyone in Zoom who would like to address the board that hasn't already, please put your name in chat now. Okay, well, I don't see anyone else, and so at this point, we're going to close public comments. And we will move on in our agenda, which I have to go back to. All right, on to item 7, the superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Lee, and welcome everybody. We'll start with 7.1, and we haven't done a return to school update in a number of weeks, and given kind of where we are in getting ready for the new school year and the decision in front of the board this evening regarding masks, we thought it was the right time to reintroduce this particular part of the superintendent's report. Caitlin's going to run the slides for us this evening. And so we can jump to the agenda. So we have done each one of these with a little agenda. And so I want to touch again on our guiding principles that we've tried to follow as well as we can throughout this entire process of COVID-19 and getting kids back to school and trying to keep kids safe. We'll talk a little bit about where we are with the health metrics. We know what's happening nationally, internationally, but this is a little more local snapshot. Some of the main mitigation practices that are being recommended, and we've heard a number of speakers cite various studies and but there is a kind of common set of mitigation practices that we think are important to pay attention to, and think we should continue to pay attention to. Then I'll talk a little bit more about where we are with our mask requirement recommendation, and really focusing on the CDC guidance at this time, and other places where guidance, and again, a number of speakers have referenced these things. That part is not the moment of debate for the board. That comes a little bit later, in the agenda for the action item that'll go in front of the board, but it gives a little bit of kind of foreshadowing. And so the presentation that I'll make when we get to that particular item can be much shorter. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. And so in our guiding principles, and here are the 4 we followed all along, really focused on safety and well-being. Right? So how do we maintain as much safety and well-being as possible for students, staff, families, and then the impact we may have on our larger communities. Trying to make sure we have learning that works for all, and that was always a work in progress throughout all of the various forms of in-person, hybrid, virtual. Trying to be responsive and flexible, and then practicality of implementation, and I'll focus a little bit more on that a little later here in the slides. So where we are with the external health metrics, and again, these are a little more localized than some of what we're used to looking at when we watch television. And we can see that during the summer months, things like the national trends have gotten worse again, and a number of speakers this evening have cited that. So the August 3rd, it's the last burden report, so it's the official report we received from the West Allis Health Department. And so they also share some of the county areas, and so what we've been tracking is Milwaukee County. It's the vast majority of where our students and families live. We've also been tracking West Allis, West Milwaukee data, right? And so you can see the COVID burden status or burden rate, as we've been talking about it, has increased again, and the colors, move from green to yellow to orange to red, and there's a kind of middle green and then a brighter green if things are really in good shape. And the arrows indicate that we're definitely moving in the wrong direction. I added August 8th, and that's a pull directly from the CDC, and there's it's an active link in the presentation. So you can go directly to the CDC, you can click on your state, click on your county, and it gives you the latest 7-day average. It's always 1 day behind. So this was yesterday's 7-day average. And just by comparison, you get a little sense of where things are going. And so I think it is a cause for us to really think carefully about how we're bringing kids back to school. We're committed to in-person learning. How we get them there and keep them there, I think, is one of the challenges in front of us this evening. In terms of mitigation practices, so the most common, and none of these are surprise to any of us at this time, right, after all we've been living with during these months, but I think messaging more and more, promoting vaccination, right, among everyone that's eligible. So among students, teachers, family members, community members. Oh, a data point I failed to mention on the last slide. If you could go back one, Caitlin. Down at the bottom there in bold. So this is another data point that was just shared by our West Allis Health Department. And right now, 52% of residents 12 years and older have received a vaccination. And that was a data point I specifically asked for it, and I was surprised and disappointed by how low it is. I was hoping to see a much higher number because it may change the way we want to think about what we're trying to do to get kids back into school. So if that's where we are in our communities, again, I want to just message the number one thing that's helping us is people getting vaccinated. And so to promote that as much as we can, we will be running some promotional activities for students, so similar to things you've seen on television, to encourage students, and especially students get to be at 12 years of age, to do some, whether these are raffles or those kind of things, will roll out at the beginning of the school year just to encourage everyone to participate. The second mitigation practice that gets pointed to all the time, promoting consistent and correct use of masks for everyone, regardless of vaccination status. Physical distancing we're used to, and right now trying to maintain 3 feet of space, but that one gets to be more and more difficult if we're bringing the vast majority of kids back in person. That's why the other ones get to be more important. Screening, testing of students and staff, so we're working. We're not sure we'll have that all in place. There are a number of school districts now that are trying to work with the state to get that done. Staying home when we're sick, improving ventilation, we've heard about that, and we still have all of our kind of air handlers at maximum, and all of those, that equipment that we purchased are ready to go. Again, hand hygiene, enhanced cleaning and disinfecting, signage and communication. What you'll notice is not here are plexiglass barriers, right? And so, just like has been mentioned, the science evolves, and it evolves pretty quickly, and I hope it continues to, because we need to keep up with this thing. And so ventilation has become more important than plexiglass barriers, and plexiglass starts to impede ventilation flow. So we'll see a lot less plexiglass in schools as we bring kids back to school, but it's all available if it makes certain staff or students more comfortable in the learning environment. So with that, so the mask wearing recommendation that we're really kind of promoting, and Caitlin, can you move to the next slide, is really following the CDC guidance. And the reason we're leaning heavily on the CDC guidance, even though there's competing points of view, even from our own medical director, but the reason we're leaning there at this time is that's what we followed consistently, right? That's what we started with. And even though guidance from the CDC has changed as science has changed, we think to be consistent at this point is the kind of practical approach to take. And they're recommending universal indoor masking for all students and staff and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status, right? And again, there's active links here for anybody who wants to take a look at this. I do want to highlight, so the next slide from our medical director, Dr. Johnson. So this was in an email. It's also quoted at length in the executive summary, which is the action item for the board to consider later in our meeting. But I share this because you might think that we wouldn't want to share this because it's inconsistent with the recommendation we're making, which is to follow the CDC guidance and other sources of guidance. But I think it's important for us to be honest and transparent and just put everything out there that we know. There's no reason to hide it. It's just that the preponderance of guidance suggests something other than what our medical director is suggesting. But again, I think it's appropriate that we're just open and honest about the various points of view that exist as we try to figure out how to go forward. So another place of reference is the American Academy of Pediatrics. So they came out not too long ago, again, consistent with the CDC. And so I think what I've highlighted in red is the potential difficulty monitoring and enforcing mask policies for those who are not vaccinated, right? And so this idea of making it recommended for those who are not vaccinated, and then how do you enforce that in a way? And I think it gets to be highly problematic if you think about our practicality of implementation guideline. And to try to do that well in schools, I think is nearly impossible. But again, AAP is recommending universal masking in schools at this time. Then our local health officers, and we have relied heavily on them as we've worked through this, past almost 2 years now. And again, they're really pushing, and this is, again, right out of a memo we received from the health officers from Milwaukee County collectively, and then there's another letter just from Greenfield and West Allis health departments that we've worked even more closely with through these years. That's linked in the executive summary that supports all of this as well. So again, vaccinations universal masking, physical distance, quarantine of close contacts, and then the additional layers of protection that I already talked about, right, are all the things that they're recommending. There's also consistent guidance from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services and the Department of Public Instruction, and they came out with this last week. And again, I'm just going to end up repeating myself over and over and over. Vaccinations, masks, social distancing, other mitigation practices, screening, testing. So all of those things, I think, start to really become the preponderance of evidence that I've talked about, is why we're making the recommendation we are at this point. However, it's really where the board wants us to go, and whatever direction the board decides to set, we're certainly prepared to pursue that direction and implement that as well as we can. What I do want to share, though, is we did a quick survey. This didn't have universal participation, but to get at least some feedback from staff. And we asked 3 questions of staff. So how comfortable are you with the decision to wear a mask being optional for students and staff? And there's quite a bit of support for that, right? So 5 is very comfortable, and 1 is very uncomfortable. But it is interesting that they split pretty widely on either being very comfortable or going towards the lower end of the scale. Then we asked a little different version of the question: how comfortable are you with masks being required for unvaccinated students and staff? And there, the majority are in favor of that. They're very comfortable for required for unvaccinated. Again, it's a challenge of implementation, enforcement, compliance. But more than the first question are actually uncomfortable with that idea. So then the last question we asked: how comfortable are you with masks being required for all? And here our staff really split. There's more people that are uncomfortable with that than comfortable, but it's pretty close. And so when I first got the data, it's like, well, it's interesting, but maybe it doesn't help all that much, because it doesn't really shift tremendously in one direction or another. We did share with staff when they took the survey that this is not a vote. This is not going to be a, if the majority say we should all wear masks, that's automatically what's going to happen. We want to just to gather some of this as additional information that the board might find valuable as you deliberate the direction we'll take a little later this evening. So then our rationale, right, and I've mentioned this already, our goal is to open schools, keep them open for in-person learning. We have established a virtual charter school, but it being charter school, officially a separate school, we can't assign a student there that doesn't want to go to a charter school, right? If the parents don't want their student going there, we can't say, well, you refuse to wear a mask, you have to go to the charter school. And and given that if we have masks being recommended but not required, we may have more quarantine of staff and students than we're anticipating and that we're ready for. So now we probably have to reintroduce other virtual options. So again, having some teachers teaching both in-person and or hybrid, so in-person and students in school all at the same time, just because of the dynamics of the COVID spread in the community as we've seen, and depending on mask requirements. And but the goal again is open schools, keep them open. Our rationale is really the recommendations and guidance from the various entities that I've already cited are strongly consistent. Students younger than 12 cannot yet get vaccinated. As soon as they can, we'll promote that like crazy, and we're hoping it's sooner in the fall than later. And then beginning the year with caution, and then evaluating the local health metrics to determine when a change to masks are recommended for unvaccinated individuals, but not required, may be implemented, and in which locations. And that's a little bit in the formal recommendation in the executive summary. And it's not unique to West Allis, West Milwaukee, other school districts that are having this very same conversation right now. Maybe considering this idea of, do we start with everybody, look, a month in, and how are we doing, especially in secondary, where the vast majority of people are eligible to get vaccinated? Is that going well? Can we back off there? And then as soon as the majority of elementary kids are vaccinated, can we make it optional there? Is it a potential approach? So in terms of next steps, again, right, so you'll have your discussion and action later during this meeting. And again, we're prepared to implement, the mask wearing recommendations that we've put forward, or others based on your action. So whatever the direction you want to set for us, we're prepared to support that. And then again, I just want to ask that you consider the challenge of compliance, right, with whatever it is. Is it practical to implement it? I think is a piece that is just to keep, I think, be mindful of. So that's the update. So then I'll go on to 7.2, which is the legislative update. So GOP lawmakers target public schools with transparency/culture war legislation. A number of legislative proposals have been introduced that target public schools, including independent charter schools, with measures aimed at increasing transparency to parents and the community. It's possible these bills could have public hearings in the near future, and we wanted to make you aware of them. WASB is concerned with the trend of these types of bills that indicate a lack of trust by lawmakers and locally elected school board members in local control of K-12 education in general. I mean, we receive requests for records all the time. Often it is related to things that are curricular in nature, and we always respond and share responsive records. Some of this feels a little redundant potentially, but just so the board is aware. Legislator takes no action in special session on K-12 funding, so I think we're aware Governor Tony Evers called a special session on July 27th to take a proposal he called to do what's best for our kids in schools, and that was to boost funding for K-12 schools and higher ed by $550 million. The legislature did convene and ended the special session with no discussion or consideration of the governor's proposal. New resources are being made available for emergency connectivity funds. The Federal Communications Commission has provided new resources for applicants seeking schools technology funding help from the Emergency Connectivity Fund. The ECF program is a $7.17 billion federal program enacted as part of the American Rescue Plan Act in March of this year to help schools and libraries provide the technology tools and services their students and communities need for remote learning during the COVID-19 emergency period. Then DPI, the 21-23 biennial budget summary. So DPI has released its summary of 2021 Wisconsin Act 58. So Act 58 is the budget. The document summarizes action on the state budget for K-12 school funding, public libraries, and lifelong learning, and the department's operations, so DPI's operations. And then education committees to take up bills banning the teaching of race or sex stereotypes. The legislature's education committee is scheduled a joint hearing next week to take testimony on bills Republican sponsors say would ban critical race theory in K-12 schools by prohibiting the teaching of race or sex stereotypes. Critical race theory is often defined as a concept that institutions in the United States are inherently racist as they function and therefore maintain racial inequalities. Along with banning teaching on race or sex stereotyping, the legislation would prohibit instruction or training that one race or sex is inherently superior to another, or that an individual bears responsibility for acts committed in the past by others of the same race or sex. The committee also plans to take testimony Wednesday on legislation that would require school boards to post online information on learning materials used in pupil instruction. And that last part we already do. It's part of annual notification requirements. So that we're going to watch that one carefully. We think it will not change, at least my understanding of it at this point, will not change our approach to our equity beliefs and our work around equity, diversity, and inclusion, but we're going to watch that one a little carefully. And then at the federal level, a couple of things. CDC updates guidance again, and now recommends universal masking in schools. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I've covered that in the earlier presentation. And then the U.S. Department of Education also released a returning to school roadmap. And again, resources, fact sheets, guides, as we bring students back to school. And these are very similar to what we've seen in the past, but updated as the science has evolved a bit about how to bring kids back to school. And like our goal is to try to keep them there. Then very quickly, 7.3 is our Board of Education recognitions for this meeting. So in leadership and learning, we would like to thank Becky Grease for all her work with our scholastic training and the rollout and distribution of materials. And you see a whole bunch of it lined up here for 4-year-old kindergarten. So Becky's been in charge of getting all these materials in and documented and cataloged and back out to the schools and classrooms where they're going to be used with kids. So she's been doing an excellent job of getting the materials organized and the training set for teachers. So it has been a huge undertaking. We're grateful for all of her hard work on this. And then at Pershing, they're giving a shout out to Jeff Smith, the Pershing custodian, for all of the hard work he did this summer. And Jeff is one of those custodians. We have a whole bunch of them, but is truly embedded in the life of the school. Knows kids by name, becomes part of MTSS teams, and so Jeff is one of them. So a shout out to Jeff and just for all the work he did to help get that building ready for school in a few weeks. And then just a couple updates in response to public comments. And so some public comments from our July 26th, 2020 meeting. And so today I'm going to try to be a little more specific in my responses because it appears that from some of the meetings in the past, so we're getting some of the same questions being asked over and over when they've been responded to already in earlier meetings. And so what I want to point out here is sometimes, depending on the nature of kind of a question that comes during public comment, we'll respond in writing, just because it's complicated or it's detailed or there's records that are requested. Most of the time, the response is verbal, like what I'm doing right now. And there's no requirement either direction, and we're not even required to respond at all. But it's been a practice here, and I think it's an appropriate courtesy to respond to questions that come from the public. And so just because I want to be really clear that we are responding, I'm going to be a little more detailed here this evening. So at our last meeting, that was on July 26th, so John Molling for New Berlin, he said he's waiting for job descriptions of the seven central office administrators he requested. And he also wanted to know why 80 copies of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, were ordered and who received them, right? So with the copies of the 7 job descriptions, those were sent on Thursday, August 5th, right? We're working on a response with our attorney Hartley and Deidre Rainbow regarding who received the copies of How to Be an Anti-Racist. We've stated in the past that we're not teaching CRT to students, but as adults and leaders, we feel we should understand these types of theories to help us better understand the dynamics that may shape the world of the diverse families we serve. So our work with students is focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion that benefits all students, not the CRT work. Joe Nikolacek, also from New Berlin, he was waiting for an answer, again, from our last meeting on any fiscal analysis regarding why alternatives to We Trust health insurance haven't been considered. This is an example of where I provided the response verbally. So I provided that response on July 12th, 2021 at the board meeting. And that's all available to Joe in the meeting minutes. But We Trust continues to be a good partner for us, but we will, when we hit the next, because it's every 2 years, right? We'll go back to reconsider, are there other opportunities to explore cost savings? Joe was also again inquiring if our enrollment is declining, then our budget should be reduced. And he felt that focusing on the mill rate causes confusion to taxpayers. Again, I've responded to this verbally in an earlier meeting, but declining enrollment does not automatically equate to a reduced budget. Right, so there are many factors which contribute to the development of school budgets in the state, and student enrollment is only one of them. So, but it is important to point out that even if our school budget does go down as a result of declining enrollment, and the individual portion of a property owner's tax bill, that's the school portion, could actually go up, right? So our budget could go down, but an individual property tax bill could show an increase because valuation of property is one of those factors that plays into it, right? So it's not as easy as enrollment's down, budget goes down. He also reminded the board that, that you represent the citizens and the taxpayers and not the teachers, and I'm going to take exception with that. It is true that board members represent the citizens and taxpayers, but they also represent teachers, leaders, employees, parents, and most importantly, our kids, right? You represent all of them. He also noted he doesn't agree with free childcare for teachers, and that's not something that's before the board at this time, but we think we probably will explore it. We wouldn't be the only district in the state that offers that as a benefit. And he also pointed out that he was insulted there's no engagement with the public at board meetings, and I think this is an important one for me to detail a bit. So school board members do not engage directly with the public during the public comment portion of board meetings to avoid violation of Wisconsin open meeting laws, right? The public has the right to know at least 24 hours in advance what a school board is discussing or taking up for action, right? So for the board to engage the public in random items that show up during public comment period doesn't allow for the required 24-hour notice and would violate open meeting laws. And so that's why we don't engage. And that's why I try to follow up, whether that's in writing or now verbally. He submitted a copy of the letter he received dated June 25th and feels all board members should sign the letter if they agree with it. That letter was never intended for all school board members to sign. That would have required the board taking action to approve the letter, and in the interest of efficient communication, the letter came only from the superintendent and the board president, and that's been a practice that we've used in moments like this in the past. Right, and board members have differing opinions on a number of matters, and that's entirely acceptable, as you should. You're a 9-member board representing a diverse community, and so sometimes that's the route we take in communicating. Jason Darling, a West Allis parent, was wondering if board members were here for the right reasons. He feels masks should be optional, and we should follow surrounding districts, not just MPS. He wanted to see a survey of teachers and parents. We managed to get one done of teachers. And so that, we shared just previously in the presentation. And I already talked about, our virtual charter school is not an automatic option for students if they're uncomfortable without a mask. Then at that meeting, Steve Broadwell from New Berlin was disturbed by the letter that was sent on June 25th. The letter includes CRT terms like equity and anti-racism. He referenced links that were in another letter sent by myself in April about equity and social justice standards, and that the district has hired an equity director. He noted the mission statement of our school district includes the word equity, and he asked how about excellent or being a good citizen. So the response is we are and will continue to be deeply committed to our equity beliefs and our equity actions organized using the social justice standards. At this point, that's not going anywhere. It's the right work to ensure all students get what they need. And in terms of being a good citizen, the social justice standards certainly support that goal. I'm just going to read one of them. Students will express comfort with people who are both similar to and different from them and engage respectfully with all people. I think that's kind of how you define good citizenship. And so the social justice standards certainly support good citizenship. I also want to note we have not hired an equity director. We've changed an existing position to focus on culturally relevant teaching practices, but that's not a director level position. There's myself and 4 directors, and that's how it's been for years. Then we had a number of parents at that last meeting, all supporting masks being optional. Again, the board will take this up a little bit later this evening. And then Michael May, a West Allis parent, felt that all the comments about anti-CRT are much to do about nothing. And also felt, like he expressed this evening, mask wearing is for overall community health. And then just a couple updates and information items from me. Just a reminder, families, members of the community, if you're eligible to get a vaccine shot, please get one, right? I'm a broken record on it, but it is the #1 strategy for us to try to get a sense of normal again. And then just on some of the typical things that happen this time of year, because there is still a school year starting and we're preparing for all of the fun and exciting things that happen in a school year. We launched our leadership kickoff today, and so we had all of our leaders at the new MKE co-work space, which is in 73rd and Greenfield, which is one of these kind of collaborative, kind of drop-in, rent temporary space. And we used it for 60 of us. It was a little tight, but it was fascinating to kind of be in a space where kind of the workforce is trending and for us to see and experience that. We also spread out to all sorts of field trips across the community, and Deidre and her team organized all of this. And it was really to kind of have leaders engage in some of the deeper learning experiences and do some empathy interviews to get feedback about what kind of learning experiences really matter and really help people grow. I was in a group that we met Mayor Dan Devine over at the farmers market, and it was an opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about the history and background of development in the city and the vision of where the city is going. And I felt really good that it parallels the vision we've set for ourselves as a school district, supporting what's the development of West Allis and West Milwaukee and our other communities. We were then expected to go tour all of the murals, the walls, right? So West Allis living, what is it, walls? The walls of West Allis, I forget the acronym now. Anyways, all of the cool murals that are up in the community. And that pretty much got rained out. The plan was we were going to rent bubbler bikes and then rain after rain after rain. And the goal was that we would go and find anybody that was around kind of taking a look at one of these murals and ask them some of the empathy interview questions to help kind of inform our practice. And tomorrow, all the leaders are doing public demonstrations of learning. So similar to what we ask our students to do, and we were each assigned certain standards. We had some 5th grade ELA and math standards and a social studies standard that then we have to be able to demonstrate that we've met that standard through this experience and through the people we talk to. So it's, I think, a kind of exciting kickoff for us to get back to the core of the work we've committed to over the last few years and not have everything be focused on masks and COVID and mitigation, but also the learning that we're trying to inspire amongst our leaders, teachers, and kids. So that was a long report, but that wraps it up.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lexman. So we'll move on to item 8, board reports. I will start with the review of the board calendar, item 8.1. So today is Monday, August 9th, and we have a regular Board of Education meeting. Next Monday, August 16th at 6 p.m., we have board workshop meeting on the facility planning workshop. This is, I believe, our final workshop on the work that the FAC committee has been doing. And we've had 2 really good workshops so far, learned a lot, and had some good discussions. So I'm looking forward to this last one here before we move on to some decisions that we have to make. So that's a good thing coming up. August 23rd, 6 p.m., we have another regular Board of Education meeting. And then Monday, September 13th, 6 p.m., we have the public budget hearing and a regular board meeting. So I'd like to move on to board committee reports with item 8.2.1, the Employee Engagement and Culture Committee. Mr. Keller.
Yeah, we had a short meeting about a week ago. We first of all welcomed Mary Ann Marshall to the committee as our new Director of Human Resources. We talked a bit about our employee handbook, which is currently being updated for the new school year and will be brought to the board for approval in a future meeting. And then we talked a little bit more about the final communication process for the professional educator compensation system, which should be wrapping up soon.
Great. Any board members have any questions for Brian? All right. Well, thank you for that update. And then we'll move on to item 8.2.2, our Communication and Community Relations Committee. Ms. Kaiser.
At the July 26th committee meeting, we welcomed Amanda Stewart, our new Communications and Community Relations Director. We discussed strategies and goals for the next few years, including streamlining the schools on social media, forming internships, mentoring, job shadowing, and apprenticeships with local businesses, and other opportunities for co-curriculars. Also, we're considering school showcase nights for a few schools at a time to show off their learning instead of one school per board meeting.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Kaiser about that?
Can you just repeat that last one, Kristen? What did?
Oh, sure. We're considering school showcase nights. In the past, one school per meeting basically would come and talk about all the things they've done.
Yeah.
We're thinking of streamlining it towards like 3 or 4 schools in a room. We can just rotate through and share the ideas and see the other great work that schools are doing.
Sure.
Great. Would we then be getting to see schools more than once per year based off of that? Is that the kind of goal, or just more often?
I think so. It's also more part of just being able to share with other schools what each one is doing.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. Okay, we'll move on to item 8.3, board member reports of community events. Any board members have any community events that they would like to share? Nothing? All right. Okay, well then we'll move on to item 9, our consent agenda. We have item 9.1, approval of minutes from our regular board meeting on July 26th and the board work session and special meeting on August 2nd. Item 9.2, the employment summary, and item 9.3, the supplementary contract. Does anyone need anything separated out? If not, I will.
Move to approve.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that passes. Okay, we'll move on into our information and action items. And we have our first one, item 10.1. COVID-19 mitigation practices change to mask wearing requirement. Dr. Lexman.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep this brief because I've very much covered everything that's in the executive summary. The health metrics here are a little bit presented a little bit differently just because the most recent burden rate that was sent over from our health department came today. And so that's why the presentation in this looks a little bit different because this had already been published as of last Friday. But again, the preponderance of the guidance suggests we should start the school year with everybody wearing masks. And, you know, if the board decides to direct us to do something different, again, we're happy to support that, and we'll implement that, whatever the guidance is or the direction is from all of you to the best of our ability. That what we shaped here, is a way to maybe think about starting with everybody wearing masks. So we start with the kind of safest approach, following the guidance. And then, whether it's 4 weeks or 6 weeks in, we start to look at how are things going in secondary schools in particular. And the reason I'm suggesting secondary schools is because where most students and all adults can be vaccinated. Right? So this won't be perfect if we decide to then start adjusting or even start the year differently in secondary versus elementary, because there are some students in secondary schools that are not yet 12, right? So in intermediate schools. And that goes to my whole point about practicality of implementation. And so to have, you know, some sixth graders being required to wear masks and others it's recommended but not required gets to be really hard in terms of implementation, so that it's not a perfect solution. But the idea here is then that's why we start with everybody in masks. End of September, take a look how things are going. Can we say move to recommended for unvaccinated but not required in secondary? And then our suggestion is we would then reconsider elementary mask requirements 6 weeks after it's announced that, you know, younger than 12 can be vaccinated, right? Because that's when we're going to start to see the first wave of kids get their first shot, their second shot, and the 2-week waiting period of full immunity. As a way to start thinking about it. And then we also set some kind of metrics and what we would want to see in order to trigger some of that. And then we also tried to define out a little bit more about athletic participation, performance participation, high intensity recreation engagement. And because the CDC guidance does not, and all the other guidance, does not anticipate absolutely every single kind of thing that people engage in schools, right? They don't do schools every day. That's our job. So they have given kind of the high level guidance, but they're not thinking about, so what happens in indoor athletics if we're still, you know, recommending universal masking? And so our recommendation is, given that we had pretty good experience in the spring, so right now athletics are outdoors, so it's not a problem, but if we start getting into the next season and we're getting back indoors, that while students are actively engaged in practices, so meaning high intensity or in competition, or high intensity recreation engagement, or students performing, so the musical, for example. So if they're actively kind of rehearsing or in performance, they wouldn't need to wear a mask. But if you're sitting on the sideline, if you're waiting for your coach to show up, you should have a mask on. It's kind of how our thinking was. And again, it's a more controlled group in terms of contact tracing and exposure. So it's a little bit different in our minds in terms of its potential impact on the whole school. So that's why we've kind of laid it out this way. So our suggestion right now, start with everybody, reevaluate for secondary at the end of September, set some targets of what we'd want to see in the data to rethink those moments, wait for elementaries to have access to vaccination, and allow masks to be optional during kind of high intensity athletics and activities. So you've got Jeff.
Has the WIA given any mask requirements for this coming fall?
Not that I've seen, right.
Thank you.
Is that the end?
Yes, sorry, that's right. That's where I'll wrap it up and turn it over to you guys.
Okay. So before we discuss, I just wanted to try to frame our discussion a little bit about what we're trying to do here. And at first, I want to thank all the parents, the community members, the staff that have reached out to all of us and given their feedback and their input about what they think that we should do this upcoming school year. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. A lot of people do that, and so we know it's very important to you when you take the time out to reach out and let us know what you're thinking. And it really shows to me that everyone is really looking for the same goal, in that we have a safe education experience for all of our students and families that we have in our community. And I really think that when we're making this discussion tonight, that our focus should really be on what we can do as a board to ensure that we're keeping our students in-person learning as much as humanly possible with everything that's going on. So with that, I'd like to open up for questions or comments from other members.
Well, I would like to move to amend Dr. Lexman's recommendations for mandatory masks, and I would like to propose optional mask wearing, and I would prefer to start with optional mask wearing and create some kind of metrics that we would hit if we were going in the wrong direction within our schools, because a lot of the data shows that the kids are not spreaders. Kids do not spread from themselves to parents, or we don't know, right? We don't have exact data on that information. So why wouldn't we be able to take the other approach than what you recommended? And that would be my recommendation.
So is that a formal motion, Bill?
Yes.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second on this. We have other discussion. So this is to amend the current guidance that we've gotten from a required to a recommendation. Now, you mentioned coming up with some sort of metrics to figure out when we're going to do that. If we would switch back to required masking for everybody. And so I don't know if we'd be using the stuff that was in the procedure already for if we see the thing is that the metrics we have right now are already above where we want them to be. So our
Community metrics, but we don't have school metrics.
Yep.
We've never measured schools.
well, we have measured schools. I mean, we have internal metrics that we've been keeping track of, but we don't have metrics from school without masks. Right? No one does.
And vaccines.
And with vaccines. Right?
Yeah, we were tracking, and it's not an exact science. It's not as good as what a health department gathers, but you know, what we can track is an internal positivity rate. We're never gonna, I think, have a burden rate. But an internal positivity rate is something that we're monitoring. We haven't done it during the summer, so we don't have recent data points. And in the new health metrics dashboard, I have the first 2 weeks of school ready to go in terms of internal positivity rate. Yeah, it's a little hard to know. I'd want to have a conversation, at least I would want to have a conversation with the health department about what kind of threshold, triggers when it's time to go back to masks based on internal, but asking them, they're also going to introduce the community metric, I would imagine. I've worked with them enough for the last months. But it is possible for us, I think, to establish that. We won't be able to figure that out tonight.
I would like to have some more discussion on that. I'd like to see more, data with surrounding schools and their positivity rate being maskless, because I don't know that we have gotten that information at the end of the year. I know that's not a large sample size, but I would like to see more of that.
It was just a couple weeks. I mean, truthfully, as far as data goes, the only useful information is going to be from now moving forward, because that's with our current, virus that's circulating and with everything else. So really the data, any useful data that comes from other districts won't be until we're further into the school year.
Well, but we do have some data because we have summer programming going on. We have our summer school programs. We have our musicals where the kids are currently together, 40 children unmasked. What rates have come out of that? We have athletics that have started, have kids come up positive. We have some data already. Unmasked, what are our numbers for those few weeks that we have? We do have some data, we just gotta gather it.
I would caution comparing a small group in athletics and 40 kids together for a musical compared to an entire school. I think that you're looking at, it's much smaller, and you can contact trace a lot easier when everyone's in the same spot versus when you have people passing in hallways. You have shared spaces like lunch and specials areas and things like that too. So I don't think that would necessarily be an apples to apples comparison. The only way to really look at it is to look at actual people in school.
I'm just asking for the data. I'm not saying apples to apples. I'm just asking for what our positivity rate and the exposure that they've had currently. And we've had stuff running all summer long. We have kids that go to the YMC day camp. We have kids that are going to our rec camps. So there is a larger number of gatherings that we can find information on.
Sure.
And these are all unmasked activities currently and have been for months.
The day camps are masked.
Okay, our day camps are, others aren't.
Oh, so you want us to go to other districts' day camps?
Well,
Why not?
Go ahead, Bill.
Why not? It's local data, same kids we're dealing with. Why wouldn't we?
Well, we could see if they keep track of that information, but again, that's not gonna help us tonight. Jeff?
I just have a question. To me, it sounds like there's two motions there. One to go masks optional, and one to get the data. Or are you trying to marry them together?
You're correct.
Okay, but then we should be voting on those separately and discussing them both separately. We're discussing metrics and not the part of optional masks.
Okay. So let's handle the optional masks first.
To hold off and amend to gather more localized mask-free data before making the vote? Or would it be to amend your recommendation and to go optional?
I guess the question is how readily available that data might be, to try and get it from other districts. If they're tracking it or not, from their day camps, I don't know. We might be going back to individual health departments to try to pull that information to see. It's an I don't know question about if the data that you're looking for exists in a space that would be readily available to get. We know our data, because we have, that we're keeping track of it, but some districts may or may not be doing that, especially if they're not masking. They might not be worrying about it, but the health department certainly would, because they would be following up on contact tracing and so forth and so on. I'm not sure, like for Waukesha, they have a county health department, so I'm not sure exactly what they're doing as far as that goes for the Waukesha communities. So, when we have the motion about the amendment, do we have further discussion regarding the amendment? And Amy, if you have something you want to say, raise your hand, and I'll let Brendan know to let you, so we can hear you. Anyone else have any discussion that they wanted to have about this?
Which amendment are we discussing?
This is about making it not required but recommended.
So instead of just leaving it like wide open like that, could we say we'll start off making it optional and then us as a board decide what we're comfortable with when we decide that, yep, too many kids or there are kids getting sick, then let's go back and let's rethink it. So we could come up with that number as the board, we can say, like, I would like to know, how many kids have to get sick before we quarantine? Like, I want to have that discussion because I have a feeling what'll happen is if we said no masks and then, it's day 2 and, a little second grader gets COVID, we're going to shut down. And I don't want that either. I want us to make sure that we're not shutting down or sending, quarantining whole classrooms or doing macro mitigations just because we're not wearing masks, So I also want to know exactly what will it look like when we start school, as far as quarantining, how many kids in a classroom, will we micro mitigate by classroom? Will we be looking at the whole school? How will we do that? Because that is important to me. Because in my mind, my big question is, I want kids to stay in school. And I understand that if kids get sick, we're gonna quarantine and send them home. And so I wanna make sure that we're saying, this is what it would look like. This is what it would have to take for us And I want to talk about that number.
So-
What did we do in the past? Can you just,
I don't know, what we did in the past by heart. You know, that's,
Yeah.
the school nurses managed all of that on a day-to-day basis. But we follow what is the health department guidance. So, you know, they're the ones that, decide, you know, how far do we have to go? So an example from this summer, right, we did have an exposure. So
Right.
a teacher that tested positive, and we couldn't get a hold of the health department over the weekend. So when school started on Monday, I decided we would quarantine everybody in those classrooms until we got further information from the health department. And once they got caught up with it and did some of the contact tracing, and we were wearing masks, and kids were in very small groups working on projects. So part of our project kept kids a little more isolated. And so the quarantine got very limited, you know, only students that were really close to where that teacher was. But that could turn out very different. So it's very difficult to put a hard and fast number on these things. That's what we've learned. The answer we get back so often is, well, it depends. And so then there's a whole bunch of questions they'll walk us through. And from that, decide, okay, so we don't need to quarantine anybody, or, oh, there's too many potential other contacts, so now we need to quarantine the whole classroom. So it is just part of the reality of navigating this,
So
is that it's gonna be it depends.
historically, though, we don't quarantine with other respiratory illnesses, correct? I mean, like, in the past, we've not done that.
We do with pertussis. We send kids home, and if there's exposures, we let parents know.
Right.
Right. But I
Right.
think, you know, the life of COVID has been different,
Yes.
for sure.
And that's why I'm asking. I think that that's something as a board or as a school district, or, I want to know, when are we going to be quarantining kids? What is that going to take? And I think that I want to open that discussion back up. Now, I realize that that's not what we're talking about right now, but it is in the sense that masks or no masks. I think that's going to have an impact.
Yes, so, I mean, I would agree that quarantining is gonna be a big part of what happens in this upcoming school year.
Right.
Masks or no masks. I would
Right.
also contend that if we don't have masks, that we will have more quarantining because the limit of spread is now removed. And so, if you talk about someone who's doing contact tracing, they will ask, were they wearing masks, and were they wearing masks properly?
Right.
And if the answer is no, that will change what's gonna happen next, and how many people may have to be affected by that versus if they were masked. And so, again, there's no hard and fast rule on it, you know? It's not hard and fast. It depends a lot on how much time and how close, and then how many people, and that will determine on, well, you know, that's 3/4 of the class, well, we just gotta shut that class down, or that's 3/4 of the grade, like we had at Lane, and now we have to shut the grade down. And so those are the things that we're trying to avoid. And masking helps prevent the extent to which we have to do those mitigation measures. Jeff?
I think we determine which of the motions we're gonna work on first, because if the motion to amend gets voted down, we don't need the metrics.
Okay.
It's kind of a moot point.
Can I
Sure.
make a motion to amend Bill's original motion? That might clarify things, so that it's not two separate motions. I would say, recommend that we make mask optional, but recommended with internal positivity rate standards in our buildings to be set forth by our next regular board meeting.
That's kind of what I'm asking for. I'm asking for.
So, it's interesting. The internal positivity rate data we'll have will be from summer school and summer camps, right? We won't be in session with all schools.
Right.
Right.
And it's masked.
Mask optional, but recommended internal.
But that
Let me-
motion would solve the problem of having two separate ones.
Right. Then let me just think for a second to reword that differently.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm getting there. Internal. What if I say internal standards in our buildings to be set forth in our meeting without, okay. Mask optional but recommended with internal standards in our buildings to be set forth by the next meeting. So I'm gonna make a formal motion that we make max.
Amending.
I'm amending Bill's motion, thank you, Jeff. Masks will be optional but recommended with internal standards in our buildings to be set forth at our next regular board meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a amended motion and a second. Do we have further discussion? So the big thing on this is going to be that we're not going to require masks, we're making it optional, and a wait-and-see approach.
I think my biggest concern is we're going into it to a degree blind because we don't have like a baseline starting point in terms of what that data really looks like, in terms of, what potentially could that look like with no masks and with the percentage of vaccinations that we're at and so on and so forth. That's the part I don't like, is that we're kind of blind from that perspective. So
I'm not, sorry.
No, I mean, I think the only, I lost my train of thought.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, okay, so the last month of school, districts chose to go optional, right, or mask-free?
Last couple weeks.
The last couple weeks?
Yeah.
So why do we know of any spikes over the last couple weeks without masks?
It's just a difficult thing.
Okay, so we don't. So why wouldn't we be able to start that way with knowing that school districts ended with weeks without any masks, that we don't know that there's been any spikes? Why don't we have a timetable on how we start?
Because it's the riskier option. To me, it risks the ability to keep people in person learning, because we can have more quarantines, more people sick, teachers out. When we get too many staff sick, we have to shut down schools because we can't staff them. So I think that, it's the riskier option to do it that way in the hopes that it works out okay. And if it does, then we're great. But if it doesn't, who wants to hear the V word again? No one wants to do virtual learning, except for those who have selected our virtual academy. And I really think that we have to focus on trying to keep people in person learning as much as possible. And masking, every professional organization under the sun has said masking for everybody in K through 12 schools is the way to do that. And so by us not following that and just saying, well, I know they said that, however, we think something differently. If we're wrong, it's the children that are gonna suffer.
And if we're right, masking the children is gonna be a problem.
But then we can use that time and actually see our own data and look at it.
But we don't understand what damages we're doing with masking though either.
Well, I think it's understood by all the organizations that have signed on to this. I believe that in their training and their schooling and the work that they've been
Talking
doing.
like psychological damage and stuff like that.
That's all taken into account. They're not only looking at one aspect of it.
We've never masked in this way before. When you're talking about
This
masking kids.
COVID isn't like anything else we've seen.
I understand that.
It's very, very different.
I understand that.
And then
So
if we
got an
have,
amendment, we're ready to vote, I guess then, right?
well, this is the discussion portion, Bill.
Right, no, I feel like you're directing the conversation to what you want us to, that you're telling us. That's what I feel like's happening. So let's go to the vote and we'll vote.
Well, I had more discussion.
All right. Do we have more discussion?
I'd just like to point out too that at the end of the year, things weren't as open as they are now. Our kids are out there. If you think they're not at birthday parties, at the state fair, if they're not at stores without masks, they have far more exposure now. You put them in a mask in school, that's not gonna alleviate their exposure outside of school because they're going everywhere now.
No, but then that exposure they get outside of school is mitigated by the mask.
But the masks aren't 100% effective.
No, but it's gonna be more effective than nothing.
Okay.
I think that In my opinion, I call this trying to stack marbles. That's what we're doing right now. We're trying to stack marbles. And I think that we need to move on because I don't think that any more discussion is going to change anyone's minds.
Well, not everyone has had an opportunity, so I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Jeff?
I move to call the question.
I'm sorry, you moved to what?
I move to call the question.
Oh, call the question, okay. We have a motion to call the question. Do we need a second?
The motion I made is to stop discussing.
Second.
Okay, I hope everyone was able to say everything. So, all those in favor of the amended mask requirements from required?
Now you need to
You have
vote
to
on
vote
that.
to call the question first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And discussion.
That's the motion on the table.
I
right now.
apologize.
Yep.
All right, we have a motion to call the question in a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? I don't know if Amy. Amy, did you vote aye?
Amy, thumbs up?
Did you vote aye to call the question? Yes.
Aye.
Okay. All right, so then that means we vote on the
We're on Heather's motion, amendment motion.
Okay. So, all those in favor of the amended motion, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
We get a count.
Amy, were you? Nay. So that fails. So we're back to the original motion. So that would be for required masking in schools for all K through 12. And this also includes escalators that would allow district to move forward with reducing masks as described in the executive summary. Do we have any discussion about that regarding giving it wouldn't have to come back to the board for decision? Administration would be able to make a decision based on the metrics that are in the dashboard.
So it would be based solely on the metrics in the dashboard.
If there's a motion to approve the recommendation, then yes, unless there's another version, you can amend that again differently. You can't bring the same motion back that was already voted down, but there may be a different way to amend the recommendation that's of interest to the board.
Would this be similar to what we had back at the start of this, where we had the chart that if we got to this, that automatically happens and?
Correct.
And at that point, it didn't have to go through us, we just saw the results, correct?
Correct, that's why I try to structure it a little bit that way, so that we don't keep coming back to this, we know kind of what the threshold is, we move on.
Well, yeah, especially if we're not scheduled to meet for a week and a half, and you need to know to get information out to the buildings. If we have like some rubrics for it, I get it.
Correct me if I am wrong, but I think I saw something about revisiting every 4 weeks. Is that correct?
4 to 6, yeah, I think we said. Which makes sense, especially with the upcoming vaccination approval for under 12 that is looking at the end of September at this point. And so being able to look at this again after they're available could really be helpful.
Yes, but I guess my argument is if for some reason we are in a position where it looks like we could change more quickly, I would not want to be hindered by a 4 to 6 week timeline.
Can we call special meetings?
I was gonna say, in regards to what Brian's saying, say the rates drop drastically in the next 2 weeks, and now we go back to school September 1st, and our positivity rate is down. We've already said that for a month they're in mass. And that's a month away.
So it could be as simple as changing in that second paragraph of the recommendation, mask requirements will be reviewed regularly. So then if both of those metrics are hit, the other one from the previous discussion, thought, do we add an or, so the West Allis, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate is at or below 50, positivity rate is at or below 5%, or it could be an and/or, internal positivity rate is 1% or less. So that would be our internal metric. And so that could trigger it separately, right? So if we get, maybe the Milwaukee County rate still didn't quite get there, but the internal positivity rate is sitting at the 1% or less, then it gives me the latitude to say we're gonna relax mask requirements. And it goes back to that kind of, let's use our kind of internal number as a trigger. So by saying it and/or, yeah, that does that.
I would be okay with looking at our local burden rate. I would have concerns about only looking at an internal school rate, because if we're doing well in our schools, that's great, but as Heather pointed out, these kids are going out in the community.
Mhm.
And if our internal community, if our West Allis, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate is still high, then I think that's gonna be a problem, because, okay, now we're not masking, kids are going out in the community, getting exposed, coming back to school. If the school's the place that we can control as far as how much mitigation we have, I think looking only at our internal numbers, because last year our internal numbers were 0.12%. I mean, they were very, very low.
Right.
For our exposures, very, very low, which was good. It means that we were doing well as far as making sure that we weren't having this happening in our schools. That's my concern. But I would have no problem as far as looking at, it wouldn't have to be both Milwaukee County, and we did kind of this last year, focusing on the local data, the most local data, and weighting that more than the total Milwaukee County data. And looking at West Allis, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate at or below 50, and positivity rate is below 5%, which we just recently went above. I mean, we were there for a very long time. And so the hopes would be that with the vaccinations continuing, and that this current spike that we're seeing right now is not long, short-lived, that would come back down and we could move forward with this.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, that idea is that we would drop the Milwaukee County
That would just be
threshold,
fine.
and we would just go to the West
board
Allis,
thinks
West
on that.
Milwaukee threshold in that recommendation.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can include our internal metrics as part of the decision-making process for sure, because obviously we don't want to be like, well, we're doing great in the community, but our schools are terrible. We're not going to unmask in that situation. But if, I wouldn't want to just only look at that. I think as a composite is the best way to look at it.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to amend a couple of words?
Yeah, what is the, so we're removing Milwaukee County and then adding in internal positivity rate is it at or below 1%?
I think I said below 1%.
Yeah. So I'm gonna make a motion to approve the recommendation, the amended recommendation.
Would you repeat how it's being
Yes.
amended?
So it's the second paragraph of the recommendation.
Yep.
So the first sentence will now read amended, mask requirements will be reviewed monthly. Well, no, will be reviewed
No,
regularly.
regularly.
Will be moved, mask requirements will be reviewed regularly. And if the West Allis, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate is at or below 50, and positivity rate is at or below 5%, and/or the internal positivity, or positivity rate is below 1%, the administration will have the authority to make mask, the rest of that should be the same.
Was it originally 1%? I'm sorry.
Less
Was it,
than 1%.
They say,
was it originally 1% or lower, and then, or did you
I think
change
he
that?
said below
I
1%.
thought I said
You
below
said
that.
1%.
Maybe
I
I-
typed in 1% or less.
Oh.
It
okay.
should be
So then
1% or
maybe
less?
say
1% or
Yeah,
less.
that's
Okay.
what I'm asking, yeah.
That's what I thought it
Okay.
was
Okay.
originally.
So let me
Okay.
just read it down.
Right, read it again.
Mask requirements will be reviewed regularly, and if the West Allis, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate is at or below 50, and positivity rate is at or below 5%, and the internal positivity rate is 1% or below, administration will have the authority to make mask requirements in secondary schools recommended for all unvaccinated individuals, but not required. And the administration will have the authority to adjust mask requirements in elementary schools when the same data thresholds are met with implementation of any changes 6 weeks after COVID vaccines are approved for children younger than 12 years of age.
Not to be a stickler again, but when you were talking about internal rates, was that supposed to be an and/or?
Good.
Because this time you just
Good.
said and.
Yep, I thought that too.
Well, yes, and I did say and because I mean, and this is me, the board can decide if they want it to be and/or. I wouldn't want us to make a decision solely on the internal metrics. And so it would always be inclusive. So it'd be 1, 2, 3. We wouldn't just be one, it would just wouldn't be two, it would have to be 1, 2, 3. All three would have to be meeting that.
I think the first time you read it, though, when we had to correct because of the 1%, you did say and/or.
Yeah, so we want and/or?
So I think and/or still gives you the
That
flexibility
flexibility.
Yeah.
you're looking for because you have both words.
Yeah,
there.
I find it a nice balance. There's not a perfect solution in this. We all know that. I mean, this is crazy hard stuff to try to figure out where to go and what's right for our kids and community. So the little bit more flexibility in there with the and/or I like. It probably gets us to the point of relaxing requirements at secondary schools more quickly. It'll get us let's get the school year started, see how it goes, and at the end of that first week, I'm gonna start looking. What's our internal positivity rate, and are we ready then to say, okay, we're cool in secondary? But what I do like about this is the most vulnerable population, right, our youngest kids are protected in this until they're available, until vaccines are available, the metrics are good, and 6 weeks after. So I like the balance of that, and the and/or gives it just a little, I think, more opportunity to maybe relax things more quickly than not.
Okay, so I'll say it again. Mask requirements will be reviewed regularly, and if the West Dallas, West Milwaukee COVID burden rate is at or below 50, and the positivity rate is at or below 5%, and or the internal positivity rate is at 1% or below, administration will have the authority to make mask requirements in secondary schools recommended for all unvaccinated individuals but not required. And the administration will have the authority to adjust mask requirements in elementary schools when the same data thresholds are met with implementation of any changes 6 weeks after COVID vaccines are approved for children younger than 12 years of age. That is how the motion would read.
Okay, so just to clarify, talking about elementary, you would not lift the mask until the vaccine was available and up to 6 weeks after that. So we're aware that that could bring us into
November.
If
December, yeah.
December, I mean, we're aware of that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be thinking somewhere around the first week of October, if everything goes according to what I've seen as far as approval. So then 6 weeks after
And then
that.
6 weeks to have parents have some time to go and.
Well, it's presuming they got it right away. It's 3 weeks between shots. 'cause
Right,
it's
okay,
Pfizer.
okay,
And
so
then
then
2 weeks
it's-
after the last shot is the fully vaccinated status. So that's why the 6 weeks is there. So not everyone might get one. You know, I mean, it's just saying like this is the opportunity. You know, if there's most people who are going to get their children vaccinated will get it as soon as it's available to them. And so there might be some other people who wait until, you know, EOA is replaced with full passage by the FDA, which probably won't be until early next year. But this gives us the time frame where, well, it's most likely, and we'll probably working with having vaccination clinics at our schools and stuff like that at that time too, to make it more available for those who might not have an opportunity to take their child somewhere to actually get the vaccine done.
But this still has our staff members who are vaccinated, who we've encouraged to vaccinate, wearing their masks the whole time.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Right, and with the data that's coming out with the Delta variant, I mean, people who get vaccinated can still transmit it. That's why the CDC changed the recommendations.
I'm aware. I've done my research. I know all this. I've read everything out there on both sides of the fence. I'm not debating whether this science or that science is correct. What I'm asking is, we have put forth that we want you to get vaccinated, but then we're still going to say to you, guess what? Your vaccination wasn't enough. And people were against that vaccination, did it anyways. And now we're going to say to them, what you did and what we asked you to do wasn't enough. That's my moral dilemma for me.
Okay.
So that's all I'm putting out there, is that for me, that seems very unfair.
Was there a motion on the floor?
Yeah, I motioned, but no one seconded.
Oh, second.
So,
Oh, I apologize.
We're voting for the updated version.
Yeah.
Or if you vote no, you're going back to the original mask policy that we had.
Correct.
Currently.
Yes, yes, that's correct.
If a majority would vote to that amendment, though, it would pass.
Correct.
So that we wouldn't go back to the original if the majority
Right.
voted for this.
For the
Just
new
clarifying,
updated.
yep.
Right.
Okay.
Motion second, any further discussion? Let me get Amy up again, oh shoot. Okay, Amy, do you have any discussion? No? Okay. No further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
I said aye.
Oh, so, Amy?
She said aye.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
Okay.
she raised her hand.
All
No,
right.
she wrote it down.
She wrote it down, okay.
How did Amy vote? I didn't see.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, that passes. Thank you very much. Moving on. Item 10.2, 2021-22 informational budget update. Ms. Wimber.
Yeah, and well, Caitlin's walking up. This is really just to give the board a little more background and what we're posing in the next 4 items, which are the base wage cost of living increases for teachers and EAs that are negotiated, but then for everybody else, and we've always matched them across employee groups. But just before we ask the board to consider those, we wanted to give you a little bit of update on, can we afford all of that in the budget?
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lexman. And we also kind of talked through, ever since spring when we start initially talking about the budget for the next school year, we always say this budget is in flux, and we'll kind of talk through some of those updates now and why that happens throughout spring and summer. So when we approved the preliminary budget at the end of June, I just wanted to recap some of the items that were already in that prelim budget. So approved at the end of June with the preliminary budget for 21-22 was a projected deficit of about $1.1 million with our plan to balance our final budget. And that plan included utilizing dollars that the board previously set aside in Fund 38, which is our debt service fund within our revenue limit, to utilize those Fund 38 dollars to essentially balance our budget. And what that means is with Fund 38, with revenue limit debt within the revenue limit, whenever you pay that debt payment, it basically lowers what you can utilize in Fund 10 with your operational dollars. So instead, utilizing the dollars that are already in Fund 38 for future debt payments basically just gives us that money back within our Fund 10 budget. So that was our plan to balance our final budget once we get to that point. So at the end of June, we were looking at a projected deficit of about $1.1 million, which was very normal and consistent with our previous years. And each of our previous years, we've made a plan in recent years to balance our final budget, which we've done. Also included in the prelim 21-22 budget was an increase of CPI of 1.23% for all of our returning employees. And this budget also included fully funding our new professional educator compensation model, which is all of the components within the first year. So that meant the annual increase, that meant the retroactive micro-credentials in year 1, and then obviously we haven't gone through a full fiscal year yet with new micro-credentials, so it's the retroactive micro-credentials. And so the fully funding that new professional educator compensation model was included in the prelim budget thus far. We also, on the revenue side, utilized an assumption of a $0 per pupil increase in the revenue limit. So that's one of those important factors in determining our total revenue, and ultimately within that revenue limit. We utilized that $0 increase. That's what we were hearing the state legislator was potentially going to do. So that's our conservative measure right there, instead of utilizing a $200 increase, which was in previous years. So that was what was included in the prelim budget. So what's changed since then? The state has approved the biennial budget, so the 21-23 budget, but there is additional budget discussion at the state level. So that was in the legislative update that we heard earlier this evening, which is sort of odd because normally once the state budget is approved, you know your budget factors. This is a year where the state budget is approved and there's additional discussion, additional unknowns at this time. There also have been, internally, we've done some funding analysis within our special education fund, so Fund 27, and some interesting opportunities that we had with our number of special education students in the 2021 school year. So I'll talk through that piece as well, and then a staffing analysis. Those are pieces that we get closer and closer to throughout spring and summer to ultimately narrow in on our final approved budget before a budget comes forward in October. So digging into each one of those items quickly in a few slides here, the state budget update. So the state budget was passed with a $0 per pupil increase in the revenue limit, which is what we used in our preliminary budget. So same as our assumption, but there's additional discussion now on additional dollars. So one component that we've heard about is this $100 million in federal dollars that could potentially come to schools as an additional per pupil aid. And that would be a one-time aid. It wouldn't be within the revenue limit. It wouldn't be recurring, but it would potentially be within the 21-23 budget. So the 2 fiscal years for us, 21-22 and 22-23. And if this comes forward as the initial, again, this is all projections, this is just initial talks at this point, but if it comes forward with what we're currently hearing, that could potentially be an additional $880,000 for our school district over 2 fiscal years. So it would be wise for us to utilize half of it in the 21-22 fiscal year and half of it in the 22-23 fiscal year. Again, that's just preliminary. There are no solid facts or approval on that piece yet. And then we also heard this additional in the legislative update, potential of additional federal dollars that would come, sorry, not federal dollars, state dollars, that would come to schools. Again, that's all very preliminary, and there's no further discussion just yet at this point that would lead us to feel that we should consider it strongly within this initial recommendation. So we'll continue to hear from the state and where that goes. This piece of the $880,000 again is also just a preliminary item, but I wanted to make our board aware. In terms of our special education funding analysis, this is a little complex. So I'm going to try to keep it at a few kind of high-level facts. So one item that we have to do within our special education funding each year is meet maintenance of effort. And ultimately what that means is that we spend the same amount or more each year between our state and local expenses within Fund 27. In 2021, so last fiscal year, we saw a reduction in the number of our special education students, which is a key component of maintenance of effort. Basically, that threshold can be reduced if you have less students. So it's just kind of a logical way that the calculation of maintenance of effort works. And we did see a reduction in 2021 of our special education students, which allowed us to ultimately reduce that maintenance of effort threshold in 2021 and basically utilize our grants. So we have federal grant within special ed, we have flow through in preschool, and basically utilize those dollars that were going, ultimately they weren't fully utilized at that point in the 2021 budget and fiscal year. And so shifting dollars from our state and local costs to the grant. So shifting onto the grant some of these expenses, which allowed our state and local costs to stay low. And then what that means for the next year, so for 21-22, is that we can maintain that lower threshold because we've lowered it in the 2021 year. We have to maintain that or higher, that new maintenance of effort threshold. So by doing this, ultimately reduced our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. Fund 27 does not function entirely on its own, so we make a large transfer, upwards of $9 million each year, from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to basically net Fund 27 at a $0. We cannot have any fund balance or function on a deficit in Fund 27. So each year we make that transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. So by maintaining our lower maintenance of effort threshold, this basically reduced our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 that was projected in the 21-22 budget by about $1 million. And it's very important to note that this does not mean that our students will receive a lower amount of service within our special education program. It just means that we've kind of reorganized the dollars that we're spending from state and local onto federal grants. And of course, as students have unique needs in their IEPs, we meet those as well. So this was a large portion of the updates that we have since our June meeting. On the staffing analysis piece, We have discovered a few vacancies that were not included within our preliminary budget that should have been. And then we've also we're narrowing in on those staff who are actually going to be on our grants. So our Achievement Gap Reduction Grant for AGR, title grants, and flow through. So as we narrow in on those and kind of add in all of those ebbs and flows within our budget, the additional revenues and expenses from these budget updates are projected to nest a balanced budget for 21-22. Depending on additional fluctuations, we will utilize Fund 38 as needed, which was part of our original plan, but will be at least $500,000 less than originally anticipated within our 21-22 budget. So we originally were planning to balance that $1.1 million deficit with our Fund 38. At this point, that's about half within our preliminary budget. We likely may not have to utilize that at all, but we should plan. We're only in August, and our budget's approved in October, so there's still some time for us to continue to narrow in on those expenses. We'll also pay close attention to what the state is doing with those additional dollars, the additional $100 million, and potentially the $550 million that Governor Evers called the special session about. So with these updates, we can move forward confidently with the implementation of the CPI increases as proposed in the coming action items. Any questions?
Can we move to vote on all three at the same time?
Yes, you'd be able to combine there's 4 items there.
Yeah.
The reason
Oh, my
that
bad.
Yeah,
the-
all 4.
I apologize.
I would recommend, just because, I'm not quite sure about the answer around CPI for teachers and EAs because they're negotiated. So I would
Okay.
recommend you vote on those separately if you want to combine the other two. The other two we always did combine. It was actually Gary Schultz that wanted those separated out last year, so we did that.
Okay.
So I didn't save you lots of motions, I just wanted.
Any other questions for Caitlin about this? So, nice work to be able to move monies around to cover that deficit. I mean, that's, with everything that happened at the state level, it was a concern. So, thank you for your team work, you and Deidre's team on that work for that, to make that happen. So, looking at much better space and being able to approve these CPIs for our staff, I think will be a good thing. So, if no other questions, we'll move on to item 10.2.
We have to take action.
No, not on
That one was just the informational.
Just informational. Oh, it says it's an action item though.
It's listed under action items.
It says informational and
Oh, it's informational
Oh,
and
okay,
action
action.
items.
we added that.
Otherwise, I was gonna move to approve her information.
Information sounds good.
Thank
Okay, so we don't have to move on that, so we'll go on to 10.3 then. 2021-22 base wage increase for teachers.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved, or, I'm sorry, opposed? That's approved. Item 10.4, 21-22 base wage increase for EAs, educational
So moved.
assistants.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Item 10.5, 21-22, are we gonna combine these two?
Yes, please. 10.
Combine 10.5 and 10.6, which is the base wage increase 21-22 for secretarial maintenance and custodial and the administrators and at-will employees.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Let's pass. Item 10.7, district organizational chart.
First, thank you to the board. You just gave everybody raises, even though they're not huge. 1.23 will be noticeable, so thank you. That'll be a little celebration tomorrow. Okay, so our last item, the org chart. So Deidre, I may need your help in this one a little bit. There are not a lot of changes. We do bring the organization chart around usually once a year. So it is an item that under policy the board approves. And so what we have done from year to year, if there are positions that we find are no longer helping or no longer needed, or we can't afford in the budget, we do take those positions out. So there was one position eliminated in this budget cycle, and then there was a position, I think there's, are the only two, then one that was repurposed. And if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. The coordinator position. Yep. So we had Saley Sabin, who was one of our school social workers, retire last year, and we have somebody else taking over several of her responsibilities, but it allowed us the opportunity to repurpose, to provide some additional support in our schools, work with our students who are English language learners, and work on some of our restorative practices and culturally relevant practices, and that's Alyssa Roche. So that's a different coordinator position on our leadership and learning team, but it's a repurposed position from an existing position, not an additional. There's one additional position on the org chart too that were not on it last year. One is the deeper learning coach at Central. We have found that in this last year, it's been really important to put some additional instructional coaching in the building, and so that's been added to the organizational chart. It's our intention to pay for that position out of some of the federal grant funding we have right now. Under the category, we don't like the term, but under the category learning loss, that's what it's called within the grant, with the intention of working with the team at Central to discuss whether or not that's a long-term needed position, or do we need to reorganize the administrative structure there after the grant expires in the next 3 years. So that is one position that was added. And then last year we had Brianne serving in the role of a principal at 2 schools. So now we have principals at each one of those schools, and went back to our historical structure of, instead of having an assistant principal at Madison, we changed to a deeper learning coach / innovation coach. So it's 50-50 on that role, as that is how we staff the buildings of that general size at the elementary level.
Any questions about that? If not, look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Jeff?
Just a question. Couldn't this be brought to us as informational, like Caitlin's stuff? I mean, we wouldn't know to say, well, this person wouldn't be good there, that person would be better.
Yeah, it is one of those odd ones, and I'll have to look back in the new Neola policy. It was in our old policy that the board approved the org chart, so I have to look now if it's in the new Neola policy, because then as information, it makes more sense. Because you're right, I mean, it's that same thing where, the board has one employee, right? But you have to approve the hire of everybody else, but that's in statute, but that doesn't actually make them your employees. So it's another one of those odd
Okay, just
kind of,
wondering.
yep, I get it. So, yeah, we'll double check it, but since it's in practice, I think right now to go ahead and approve it, and if it changes for next year, we'll bring that back.
Any other discussion? All right, we've had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes.
Amy said aye.
Oh, Amy said aye.
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so that is the end of the meeting, so.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.